Hey, Wide Awake family. If you see this, it's your sign to smash that like button. Yes, you listening right now. That way YouTube shows you more amazing stories like this one. We love you all. Now enjoy the stories. I didn't think a first date could feel like a test, but walking into that tiny rooftop cafe, I should have known something was off. It wasn't the city skyline or the way the sunset lit up the tables. It was the way the place felt designed for observation. Every table angled just so. Every light casting shadows that made everyone's movements feel a little too visible. I laughed at my own nerves, telling myself it was normal first date jitters, and tried to focus on him. He smiled easy, leaned forward like he was genuinely interested, and I thought maybe it would just be a normal evening. The menu was simple, overpriced sandwiches and coffee drinks, nothing fancy, but every dish seemed slightly exaggerated. My latte arrived with a swirl that looked like it had been painted. My sandwich layered impossibly high, the bread almost too perfect. I joked to myself that even the food seemed designed to impress, but a tiny part of me felt a tug of unease, like maybe I was noticing too much. He chatted about work, hobbies, little personal anecdotes, everything normal. As the date progressed, I tried to relax. He laughed at my stories in a way that felt practiced but not unpleasant. I started to forget the slight tension in the air, the way the servers occasionally glanced over like they were watching more than serving. I sipped my latte, trying to enjoy the cafe's ambient music, a soft playlist that should have been comforting, but the melody seemed slightly off, repeating in ways that made me uneasy. We moved to a quieter corner as the sun dipped, and I felt a small wave of relief. I thought we were clicking, that maybe the date wasn't going to be a disaster. Then the moment came, subtle at first, a notification on my phone that I didn't recognize. I glanced at the screen, expecting a text or a social media ping, and froze. The message wasn't asking for a review of the cafe or a photo check or anything ordinary. It was asking me to rate him, my date. At first I laughed, assuming it was some joke or a glitch. Maybe one of those apps where you leave anonymous ratings for friends had somehow misdirected. I scrolled through, but no, it wasn't a joke. The screen displayed stars, text boxes, prompts. Rate your date, describe their behavior, comment on their compatibility. And there, in neon white letters against the black background, was his face. Not a stock image, not a generic silhouette. His actual face. My stomach twisted. I tried to look away, to pretend I didn't see it, but the phone seemed to pulse with a soft vibration, urging me to interact. Every instinct screamed at me to close the app, to get up and leave, but my hands moved almost automatically, like they had a mind of their own. I tapped the screen, and the options opened further. The questions became oddly personal. Did they dominate the conversation? Were they considerate? How punctual were they? Did you feel threatened? My throat went dry. I looked up at him, expecting to see a smile, some kind of explanation, a laugh maybe. But his face was calm, almost expectant. The servers paused nearby, watching, the ambient music slowing just slightly, the hum of the city outside fading into something muted. The room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved closer. I realized that no one else was interacting with us. The entire cafe had become a stage, my choices the spotlight. I tried to ignore the phone, set it face down on the table, but it buzzed again. The screen lit up, a countdown this time. Complete your review, the app insisted. Stars glowing, comments required, every word I typed appearing in real time. As I typed the first line, my hands trembling, describing a minor annoyance he had caused, the lights flickered. A glass on the next table rattled. I froze. He didn't move, didn't flinch, but the air seemed heavier, charged. The first attempt to rate him cautiously resulted in the phone locking momentarily, the screen going black, then opening again with a new prompt. Rate him honestly. Failure to respond properly, it warned, could have consequences. My heart raced. I wanted to leave, but when I reached for my jacket, it wasn't there, not in the seat next to me, not hanging on the chair. The door across the room felt farther, the exit small and distant. Each prompt became more invasive. The app asked if I felt safe, if I trusted him, if I would see him again. I tried to give neutral answers, thinking maybe I could satisfy whatever system this was, but each tap of the star rating seemed to trigger changes around me. The ambient music skipped in abrupt jumps. Laughter from another table sounded distorted. The shadows in the corner seemed to lean closer. I tried typing a neutral review in the text box, hoping to satisfy it without making a judgment. The phone vibrated violently in my hand, the text disappearing, replaced by one simple line: "Honesty matters." The stars blinked red. My palms were slick with sweat. I looked at him, finally, and his expression had shifted. Not angry, not malicious exactly, but sharp, assessing, like he had read every thought I hadn't typed yet. Every instinct in my body screamed to leave. The countdown continued, numbers crawling down the screen. The prompt repeated endlessly: "Rate your date." I tried to ignore it, stuffing the phone in my pocket, but it vibrated violently, a thrum that echoed through my chest. He reached over, lightly touching my wrist, and the vibrations stopped. Calm returned, but the phone screen lit up again, larger this time, demanding my attention, the countdown faster. I realized the cafe itself had changed. The servers' faces blurred slightly when I glanced at them. Tables stretched unnaturally. Lights dimmed and brightened like a strobe in slow motion. Every movement felt orchestrated, a performance meant to pressure me into compliance. I tried to speak, to protest internally, but words didn't form. Every thought seemed audible, every hesitation visible. Finally, I tapped a star rating reluctantly. The phone buzzed violently, a final prompt: "Leave a detailed comment." I typed one, fingers moving almost mechanically, recounting a few minor annoyances and small charms, trying to balance honesty with safety. The instant I hit send, the screen went black. Silence. I looked up. The cafe felt normal again, the music steady, servers moving calmly. He smiled casually, as if nothing had happened. We stood to leave. The night air was cool, ordinary, the city sounds familiar. My legs felt weak, my heart still racing, but the phone stayed in my hand, dark, harmless looking. I deleted the app immediately when I got home, hoping that would be the end. But in the quiet of my apartment, I felt the weight of the evening, the lingering sensation that something had recorded not just my words but my hesitation, my fear, the unspoken thoughts. Even weeks later, I noticed reviews online that feel oddly personal. Other first dates experiences appear mundane, but some seem eerily aware of my private thoughts, as if someone, or something, is compiling judgments beyond the visible. I don't go out with new people casually anymore, my phone always in hand, hovering nervously. The memory of that app, the countdown, the subtle control of the cafe, lingers. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a measurement, a test, and the strange thing is, I still don't know what I rated worse, him or myself for staying so long. I thought it was going to be a simple night. I had dressed casual, nothing fancy, just jeans and a hoodie, and met him at a small diner downtown. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old grease, the kind of diner that felt normal but slightly off, like it had been untouched for decades. He smiled when I walked in, the usual nervous charm, and we slid into a booth near the corner. I tried to tell myself it was just a first date, nothing serious, just a chance to see if we clicked. At first, it was harmless. Small talk about work, favorite movies, music. I laughed at the wrong moments, nodded when I should, and felt a dull buzz of unease I chalked up to nerves. The diner had few patrons, the lighting was low, and I noticed the mirrors lining the walls reflected everything, too much. Not just our booth, but the entire room, the staff, the ceiling, the empty chairs. Every glance felt like it was under scrutiny, even if no one else was there. I decided to sneak a quick text to my friend, just to let her know where I was and how things were going. I typed out a casual message about feeling a little uncomfortable. Nothing too alarming, just enough to vent. I hit send and immediately, a chill ran down my spine when the message popped up in the little preview bubble on the table next to me. He was looking at my phone. It wasn't supposed to happen. My heart raced. I tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe I had misread the screen, but the next few messages confirmed it. Everything I sent meant for someone else landed in front of him. Panic started to creep in. I tried again, pretending to check my phone while composing another message, hoping he wouldn't notice. The words left my thumbs, typed out carefully, but the instant I hit send, the phone buzzed and there it was. He was reading it. He smiled softly, not in a friendly way, but in a way that made me feel small, like he was following along with my private thoughts without permission. I wanted to leave. I wanted to call for help, but even dialing made me hesitate. The diner felt different now, the lights dimmer, the air heavier. His eyes didn't leave me. He didn't need to speak. His gaze was enough to anchor me in place. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, but the doors suddenly felt farther than they had when I walked in, like the distance stretched with my anxiety. I tried to eat, act normal, but every time I glanced at my plate, I noticed subtle shifts. The fries on his plate seemed untouched, yet somehow longer than when the waiter had served them. My water glass refilled itself slowly, the ice clinking in a rhythm that didn't match reality. The diner's hum, the soft chatter from the few other tables, it all felt delayed, like the world was just slightly behind my senses. Another text. This time I tried a different approach, keeping it vague, hoping to signal distress without him noticing. But the instant I typed the first few letters, he leaned just slightly closer, catching the preview again. His smile widened in a way that made my stomach knot. It wasn't just curiosity, it was control. He was reading, following, anticipating. The diner's mirrors reflected his face over and over, hundreds of reflections, all smiling at me. I realized I couldn't escape my own phone. Every attempt to reach out for help, every message meant for a friend, was intercepted. My thumbs froze over the keys, knowing that whatever I typed, he would see. The feeling of violation was immediate, suffocating. I tried to set the phone down, to distract myself, but my mind kept racing. Maybe he had done this before. Maybe every person he dated had their own invisible leash tied to him through technology. Conversation became harder. I tried to engage, ask questions, nod at his stories, but the words in my head were not private anymore. Even thinking them felt dangerous. Every glance at the mirrors, every subtle shift of light, made me feel like the entire diner was part of some orchestrated observation built to monitor me. I wanted to leave to push through the tension, but my legs felt stuck. The waitress brought the main course. It smelled normal, looked normal, but my appetite had vanished. He ate slowly, deliberately, pausing between bites to watch me. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, knowing the next message could be seen before it even left my hands. The diner's hum, the clinking of cutlery, even the soft hiss of the coffee machine, became part of the oppressive rhythm. I felt like the walls themselves were pressing inward, tightening with my anxiety. I tried one last attempt, pretending to swipe through apps, hoping to redirect the phone. I typed a sentence and my fingers hesitated, knowing the moment I hit send he would see it. The message left my screen, the phone vibrated, and there he was reading. He didn't need to ask, didn't need to comment. His expression said it all. He was always watching, always one step ahead. The mirrors reflected this, hundreds of him, hundreds of reflections following me across the table. As dessert arrived, I realized the diner itself had become a stage. The few other patrons didn't notice, but they felt like props, part of the set, silent observers whose presence existed to amplify the pressure. I tried to focus on my plate, on something concrete, but even the act of eating felt like betrayal. He watched everything. The phone sat between us, an open window to my private world, and I couldn't hide behind it anymore. The evening stretched endlessly. The lights dimmed further, the mirrors multiplying every shadow, every glance. The few words he spoke, casual comments about the food or the music, were tiny weapons, each one reminding me that escape wasn't an option. My mind raced, trying to find patterns, loopholes, any way to communicate without him seeing, but the interception was complete. Finally, he stood, signaling the end of the date. My legs were weak, hands trembling. The diner seemed normal again, the lights brighter, the mirrors less menacing. But the memory lingered, the constant surveillance, the impossibility of privacy, the knowledge that every attempt to reach help had been turned against me. I walked to the door, out into the street, the city's normal chaos and noise like a shockwave. The date never repeated. I deleted the number, changed my passwords, reset my phone. But even months later, the memory of typing a message meant for a friend and watching him read it first, feeling the control and inescapability, stayed with me. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a lesson in helplessness, in how quickly something that starts ordinary can twist into something inescapable. Even now, when my phone buzzes unexpectedly, my stomach tightens. I remember the mirrors, the reflections, the way he smiled at messages that weren't meant for him. The diner itself was a backdrop, a stage for something beyond normal understanding, and the date was the trap. A night that started like any other ended with the realization that some people, some moments, can invade every boundary, even the ones you thought were private. I thought it was going to be one of those casual Friday night dinners. I wasn't expecting anything more than awkward conversation, maybe some bad jokes, but nothing terrifying. The place looked ordinary from the outside, neon sign buzzing faintly, a few people milling near the door. She was already waiting when I walked in, smiling like everything was normal. I waved, she waved back, the kind of smile that made me think everything was fine. Inside, it was quieter than I expected. Low ceilings, dim lights, mismatched chairs and tables that seemed deliberately uneven. Music played softly, jazz maybe, but it had this offbeat rhythm that made the hair on my neck stand up a little. She led me to a table in the middle of the room, right under a single dangling bulb that flickered occasionally. She said she liked it here. We ordered drinks and food, trying to make small talk. She seemed calm at first, polite, smiling, but there was an edge under her calmness that I couldn't place. The waiter brought the menus, and she insisted I pick first. I glanced at the menu and everything felt overpriced, like the numbers were exaggerating themselves on the page. I shrugged it off and picked something normal. Halfway through our drinks, she mentioned she was nervous. It sounded casual at first, but the words got darker fast. She said if this date failed, she would have to start over with someone else. The way she looked at me after saying it made my stomach drop. It wasn't a casual glance. It was the kind of look that assumed I had already failed, that whatever I did in the next few minutes could tip the scale irrevocably. I laughed awkwardly, trying to make light of it, but it didn't land. She didn't laugh with me. She just sipped her drink and watched me, like she was measuring my reaction, timing it, calculating. The room around us seemed quieter suddenly, or maybe I just noticed it. Everyone else kept eating and talking, but their movements felt slow, deliberate, like a film running in low frame rate. As the appetizers arrived, I noticed something strange. Her plate was pristine. She didn't touch a bite. Not one. I figured maybe she wasn't hungry. I started eating mine, and then realized my plate seemed to keep replenishing itself, not from the kitchen, not from the waiter, just more food appearing as if the plate were alive. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was some weird restaurant gimmick, but the moment I looked at her, her expression tightened just slightly. She didn't eat, didn't blink too fast, but I could feel that look again, the one that said I was failing already. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, just close enough that her presence felt heavy. She didn't speak, just let me eat, watching every bite. I realized then that the room had changed in a subtle way. The music had slowed down, the lights dimmed further, shadows creeping along the edges of the walls. People at other tables looked up at me sometimes, glancing quickly, and then looking back at their own plates. I couldn't tell if they were noticing me specifically, or if it was her attention projecting something onto the space around us. Conversation became harder. I tried asking questions, talking about my job, hobbies, safe things, but she would redirect subtly, asking about fears, regrets, moments I wished I could redo. Her gaze never left me. It wasn't just a stare. It was assessment. She seemed to know I was already behind somehow, that the scoreboard existed in a place I couldn't see. Then she started making subtle comments about what a failed date would look like, hypotheticals that sounded like predictions. If this meal ended without me impressing her, if my words stumbled, if my attention wavered, she said, she would have to start over with someone else. She didn't explain who, didn't offer a scenario, just implied that it was inevitable. I tried to laugh again, nervously, but even my laugh sounded wrong to her, like it confirmed the failure she already assumed. I noticed that the longer I sat there, the heavier the air felt. The food on my plate kept piling up, the lights dimmed further, the music slowed until it was more of a hum than a song. Every time I glanced at her, her smile didn't change, but her eyes narrowed just enough to make me doubt my own perception. I wondered if she was testing me, or if the restaurant itself had rules I didn't know. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, subtle gestures from other diners, small shifts of their heads, pauses in chewing. They weren't reacting to me exactly, but I could feel the tension radiating through the room. The waiters circled like shadows, never speaking, only watching, cataloging. My palms sweated, gripping the table edge as I tried to steady my thoughts. By the time the main courses arrived, it was clear she had no intention of eating. The plate was untouched, pristine, and she positioned herself so that I couldn't see her hands entirely, only the occasional twitch or adjustment. It was unsettling, like she existed partly in the room and partly somewhere else. Every time I took a bite, she would tilt her head slightly, just enough to make me question my actions. The fork in my hand felt heavier with each chew, my stomach twisting. Midway through the meal, she leaned in again, close enough that I could feel her breath, but still calm, smiling, like nothing about the situation was unusual. The words came into my mind, not hers, just a thought, a suggestion, but I felt like she had planted it. If this ended badly, she would have to start over. The weight of it, the inevitability in her tone, even unspoken, made me falter with my next bite. I tried focusing on my phone to escape the pressure, but notifications refused to appear, the screen dimming despite full battery. It was just me, her, and the room had started to feel alive, watching, measuring. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, the edges of the lights bending slightly toward her table. Every glance I threw around the room was mirrored by slight movements, people adjusting chairs, hands trembling, forks paused midair. It was subtle, but constant. As dessert came, the climax of this unnatural pressure, the room had quieted completely. The waiters, the staff, the other diners, they had all become background noise, shadows leaning in watching. I realized my date had been assessing me all along, her calmness a tool, a weapon. The slightest misstep would mark me as failed. She didn't need to say more. The energy of the room conveyed it fully. I struggled to swallow the last bite, my mouth dry. She watched patiently serene, but her eyes held a certainty I couldn't escape. The meal ended. The plates cleared themselves almost magically. She stood, smiling, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if the night was over. Then she said, calmly, that we should go. As we walked to the door, the world outside was bright and ordinary, nothing like the oppressive, tense atmosphere inside. She waved goodbye with a calm smile. I nodded, my legs weak, my chest tight. Walking back to the subway, the normal city lights and sounds felt alien. The memory of her gaze, the weight of the starting over, pressed down on me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I never went on another date after that. I avoided restaurants, cafes, even coffee shops for months. I replayed the night endlessly, the look she gave me over my failed bites, over my hesitant words. The idea that she had an inventory of everyone else waiting, inevitability of replacement, stuck in my mind. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a measure of control, a calculation I couldn't influence, a system I had walked into blind and lost in before it even started. Every time I think about her, I remember the calmness, the certainty, the smile that made failure unavoidable. The thought of starting over still echoes in my chest, like some invisible countdown ticking against me, reminding me that some nights are designed to trap you in observation, testing, and assessment. And some people are just instruments of that design. I thought it was just going to a normal little dinner. It was a new place downtown, quiet, dimly lit, with reviews saying it was perfect for first dates. My date suggested it, claiming she'd been before, liked it, thought it would be fun. I didn't know what I was walking into. The building itself looked harmless. Brick, a small neon sign flickering a little, a wooden door that creaked like any old place. I arrived first, waited near the entrance, checking my phone and trying to calm the nervousness in my stomach. She arrived a few minutes later, smiling, looking perfectly normal. She waved. I waved back. Easy enough start. Inside, the place was warmer than I expected. Dim orange lights, tables spaced generously, soft music playing that didn't demand attention. The host greeted us, smiling politely, and showed us to a table tucked in a corner. The tablecloth was thick, soft, clean. The menus were leather-bound and heavy. It felt cozy, almost like a speakeasy. We ordered drinks, some appetizers, trying to make small talk. Nothing was off, at least not obviously. The staff hovered just enough to be polite, but not intrusive. The conversation was stilted, occasional awkward silences, but nothing terrifying yet. I remember thinking the place had a weird calmness, but the air itself was too controlled. Then the lights dimmed sharply, and a voice echoed from the speakers overhead. Calm, measured, slightly metallic. Welcome to compatibility testing, mate. My stomach dropped. I looked around. The other tables were full, couples eating quietly, drinking, maybe as confused as I was. The voice repeated, all participants, please remain seated. Doors are now locked. I froze. Tried to stand. The door handle didn't budge. Tried the other exit. Nothing. The windows didn't open. Panic started to build. My date reached across the table, calm, smiling, as if none of this mattered. That didn't help. It made it worse. The waiter approached, carrying a clipboard, a pen, expression neutral. He motioned toward the paper, as if nothing about the announcement was unusual. The menu was gone now, replaced with questions, surveys about personality, preferences, fears, secrets. Each question more personal than the last, like the staff already knew things they shouldn't. I tried to laugh it off, to act like it was some weird interactive game night. She smiled along, leaning in a little, polite, calm. I noticed other couples scribbling quickly, some nervously laughing, some tense, some avoiding eye contact. I realized immediately, this wasn't a game. It was a test. The first round started quietly. Questions about trust, honesty, memories, choices. The waiter moved from table to table, watching. Nothing aggressive, nothing violent, just a careful, measured presence that made it impossible to ignore him. Then the second round began. It escalated subtly at first. The lights flickered with every answer I wrote. My pen trembled. I realized my pulse was visible somehow, through the behavior of the lights, the shadows dancing unnaturally around the room. Couples started to shift uneasily, looking at each other. Murmurs, quiet protests. The voice from the speakers reminded everyone to answer honestly for accurate compatibility assessment. I tried not to look at her. I didn't want to meet her eyes. She leaned in occasionally, asking if I was okay, calm, not alarming, just unnervingly serene. I didn't respond. Each glance made me feel exposed, like she could see right through me. Then the first incident happened. A couple across the room was asked about a past relationship, and as they whispered, the lights above them flickered violently. Glasses rattled on the table. A chair tipped over. They screamed, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed. The staff didn't react. The voice repeated, compatibility assessment in progress. All participants remained seated. I gripped the edge of the table. My hands were clammy. She reached for mine, brushing against it, still calm. I wanted to pull away but couldn't. The floor seemed uneven under my chair. I noticed other couples staring at me now, as if trying to gauge my reaction. Round 3 was more intense. The questions became invasive, personal memories, embarrassing thoughts, secrets I hadn't told anyone. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like it was absorbing my anxiety and amplifying it. The lights danced with every word I wrote, the ceiling groaning faintly as though the building itself were listening. I looked at her. She was calm, serene, smiling. It was the most terrifying thing. The calmness made the chaos around us feel more focused, like she was the center of it all. The axis the staff and building orbited around. Then the voice announced the first compatibility test. Couples were told to stand, hold hands, and repeat answers aloud. Some hesitated. One couple refused, and the floor beneath them vibrated. Their knees buckled slightly. They whispered apologies, their hands sliving apart, and the lights above them flickered more aggressively. I realized quickly that compliance was mandatory. This was not a choice. It wasn't about consent. It was about surviving the process. My date didn't hesitate. She extended her hand calmly. I took it, shaking, and the floor still beneath us. The staff circled the tables, silent, observing. The tests became stranger. Questions paired us in odd ways, forcing comparisons, evaluations, judgments. Each answer seemed to trigger subtle reactions. A slight tremor under the table, a glass vibrating, shadows flickering at impossible angles. The room itself was alive with feedback, responding to emotions, reactions, the unspoken tension. I noticed patterns. Hesitation made the lights flicker. Heartbeats echoed in the speakers. The air itself seemed to press down. Honesty, as small as it was, seemed to stabilize us. Lying, or even omitting, made the environment hostile. The rounds continued for what felt like hours. Sweat soaked my back, my hands cramped from writing, my knees stiff from sitting too long. The building itself seemed to anticipate fear, amplifying it, reacting. Other couples were crying quietly, some arguing in whispers, others just frozen in terror. I glanced at my date repeatedly. Calm, serene, smiling slightly, never wavering. A strange part of me wanted to ask her if this was normal, if she had been through it before, but the words wouldn't come. Every time I thought it, the room responded, a low hum, a lights flickering. I realized it wasn't just her. The building, the staff, the voice, they were all part of this machine, and she fit perfectly into it. The final round involved physical interaction. Tables rearranged themselves, forcing pairs closer, the chairs shifting slightly to prevent distance. The staff circled, watching every move. Small gestures had consequences. Moved too fast, the table wobbled, a glass tipped, a chair slid unexpectedly. The environment dictated our actions, punishing hesitation, rewarding alignment. By the end, exhaustion set in. My body ached, my mind was fraying. The final announcement came from the speakers. Compatibility verified. You may now leave. Thank you for participating. The doors unlocked slowly. Lights returned to normal, though the shadows still seemed slightly wrong, lingering where they shouldn't. We left quickly. The night air was crisp, normal, the city unchanged. No one followed. The restaurant looked peaceful from the outside, quiet, unassuming. I don't know how many people left intact. I don't know how many understood what had happened. My date walked beside me, calm, smiling, as ordinary as if nothing had happened. We parted ways at the corner. She waved. I nodded, unable to speak. I never went back. I never asked anyone else about that night. I can't explain how a simple dinner became something alive, something that watched, tested, punished, and measured. All I know is that some places are not just restaurants. Some nights are not just dates. Some systems want to see how you react under pressure, how your partner reacts, how you both survive. Compatibility testing night was exactly that. I still dream about the room, the lights, the low hum of the air, the subtle movements of tables and chairs. Sometimes when I eat alone at a normal restaurant, I swear I can feel a faint vibration under my feet, like a reminder that not every place is safe. I don't even know why I agreed to this place. It was some new restaurant downtown that promised an interactive dining experience, which I figured meant lights, music, and maybe a waiter that remembered your order without notes. I thought it sounded quirky. I didn't realize it meant exactly the opposite of normal. The place looked fine from the outside. Clean, modern, a soft glow from inside that made it look cozy. I arrived first and sat at a table by the window. I had a clear view of the entrance, a hostess, everything. He walked in a few minutes later, looking casual, smiling like everything was perfectly ordinary. I waved. He waved back. First impressions were normal, which made the later stuff hit even harder. The waiter came over, kind of hovering in a way that made me uncomfortable, not because of attitude, but because he seemed like he was reading me. Standing a little too close, leaning slightly, eyes flicking from me to my date, like he knew more than he should, I brushed it off. The menu was weirdly short, a few items repeated in slightly different ways, but whatever, we ordered. The food came fast, and it was fine, ordinary even. Nothing that screamed interactive, nothing that made me think I should be careful. The conversation started easy, then awkward, then weird. Not just uncomfortable, but almost like the restaurant was amplifying it. Each laugh felt louder, each pause sharper. I was joking once, just lightly, and a small clatter came from the kitchen, but nothing fell. The sound didn't match anything. It was just wrong, but I didn't register it fully yet. Then she asked me to rate the date. Casually, like it was normal to ask someone mid-meal, I froze. I didn't know if she meant a number, a word, a gesture. I laughed nervously, trying to be funny, and said it was fine. That's when it started. The lights dimmed sharply, not slowly, not like a mood change. Instantly. Every small fixture in the restaurant flickered and hummed, the sound low, like a vibration through the floor. I looked around. Other tables were full, other people eating. I noticed something first in the reflection of the window. People froze, half chewing, half laughing, like something caught their attention that I couldn't see. Then a plate slid across my table by itself. No one touched it. The water in our glasses vibrated, sloshing over the rims. The waiter leaned closer, eyes sharp, and I felt my chest tighten. I tried to laugh, tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the hairs on my arms stood up. She repeated the question calmly. Not teasing, not laughing, calm, like she had all the time in the world to know exactly how terrified I was. I opened my mouth, tried to say it was fine again, and the restaurant reacted violently. The lights overhead flicked violently, like strobe lights, but harsh, painful. Glassware rattled on tables, and some cracked. The floor vibrated like a drum, low, resonant, shaking the soles of my shoes. People screamed, chairs tipped over, and yet none of the staff moved. They just watched, waited. I looked at him, my date, and his expression didn't change. Not even a blink. Calm, indifferent. The chaos seemed to orbit him, or maybe he was at the center, and everything else had no choice but to respond. I tried to stand. I tried to reach for the door, but the path wasn't normal anymore. It twisted, tables subtly shifting, chairs blocking, angles of the floor stretching just enough to make me stumble. I realized it was like the restaurant itself was alive, responding to my words, my judgments. She smiled, a small tilt of the head, and asked again. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, and muttered that it was okay. The reaction was immediate. One of the heavier chandeliers fell with a crash 2 feet from my head. The floor cracked under the weight, splintering across the wood. People screamed, some ducked, some froze, and I realized no one else was in control. The chaos followed me. It was like acknowledging my opinion, giving it voice, was enough to trigger a response. I tried again. She leaned slightly, not too close, not threatening, just calmly, and I froze. The waiter, the kitchen, even the chairs seemed to anticipate my answer. I thought maybe if I said something really positive, it would stop. I said it was good. The reaction didn't stop. It escalated. Plates flew off tables, the air pressure changed, knocking drinks over. The ceiling seemed to warp and bend subtly, angles shifting in ways my brain tried to correct, but couldn't. I felt dizzy and nauseous, my hands shaking. I looked at her again. Nothing in her expression suggested amusement or apology. Calm, deliberate. It was like she had asked me to rate the date not for fun, but to see if I could survive answering. I tried ignoring her, kept my head down, focused on my water glass. The vibrations stopped for a second, just enough to let me breathe. Then she tilted her head again, and the chaos returned. A lamp swung from the ceiling, narrowly missing a man trying to grab it. I realized the restaurant wasn't just reacting, it was punishing. Any judgment, any metric I gave, good and fine, mediocre, was interpreted as a signal. The building, the fixtures, the air itself responded violently to my perception. I couldn't win. There was no safe answer. I tried to apologize quietly, hoping that the words would calm it. It didn't. The floor beneath my chair creaked loudly deep, as if warning me. The glassware on other tables vibrated again, a high-pitched ringing that set my teeth on edge. And still she watched, calm, unmoved, the center of this storm. I realized later that the restaurant was more than just a building. It was a system, a feedback loop. My feelings, my opinions, my hesitation, everything I projected into that room triggered an echo, amplified, turned violent. There was no normal physics here, just response to perception. I tried standing, moving toward her, trying to reach the exit again. Tables shifted subtly underfoot, like quicksand in some places, firm in others. Every step was a negotiation with the floor. Every glance at her triggered a tremor somewhere. People around me were panicking, running, screaming, trying to escape. Some disappeared behind walls or corners I hadn't noticed before, as if swallowed by the building itself. The shadows lengthened unnaturally. I realized no one was safe. None of us were. It wasn't just me and her. The room had adapted to every perception in it, punishing and manipulating with surgical precision. I focused on breathing, tried to step back, tried to tell myself that everything was a trick, a hallucination. The vibrations of the floor, the swinging chandelier, the cracking glass, they told me otherwise. Finally, I forced myself to speak. I said it was terrible. The reaction was instantaneous. Silence. Deep, oppressive silence. Even the trembling of the floor stopped. The lights held steady. The air felt thick, like someone had slammed a heavy door on the world. I looked at her, at him, at the waiter, and the calm, deliberate faces didn't change. The restaurant itself seemed to acknowledge my honesty and pause, but only just long enough to make me think it could explode again. I didn't say another word. I just moved, careful, slow, toward the door. It wasn't perfect. The angles of the floor tried to trick me. The chairs subtly adjusted to block me. The walls seemed closer than before. I ignored all of it. My legs shook. Every step was agony, but I reached the exit. I pushed through the door and into the street. The night was normal, quiet, cold. The restaurant behind me looked calm, unassuming, like a small, fancy building that served overpriced food. The windows reflected the streetlights, completely normal. No one else was around. The glow of the building was warm, inviting, completely ordinary. I don't know if anyone else inside survived. I don't know if they even existed. The only thing I know is that honesty in that place is dangerous. Any opinion is amplified, any judgment has consequences. I never saw her again. I never went back to that restaurant. But every time I walk past a fancy, interactive place, I remember the way the air hummed, the way the lights and floor and objects reacted to what I said. I remember being asked a simple question, and the world around me trying to punish me for my answer. I still don't know if the restaurant is alive, or if she was, or both. But I know one thing: never rate a date in a place that wants feedback. You might not survive it. I was running late, which wasn't unusual for me, but I felt a weird thrill knowing this date had potential. He had suggested a small art gallery downtown, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could actually hear myself think. It sounded perfect. The night air was chilly, the kind that makes your breath visible and your fingers numb, but I liked it. I arrived first and picked a bench near the entrance, the gallery lights casting long, sharp shadows across the sidewalk. He showed up a few minutes later, smiling like he had stepped out of some polished advertisement. He looked normal, perfectly normal, like every person in the city, and that made it stranger when I first noticed the shadow. I was standing up to greet him when it hit me. My shadow was moving differently. It didn't just mirror me. It stretched and twisted, reaching toward him before I even did, and when he came to stand in front of me, our shadows met first, long before our hands could. I laughed it off, thinking maybe the angle of the streetlight was weird. But then later, inside the gallery, I noticed it again. Shadows from the overhead lights were supposed to fall neatly along the walls and floors, but mine leaned toward him, and his seemed to lean toward me. I blinked and tried to focus on the paintings, but my shadow moved its hand, and his shadow mirrored it. At first, it felt playful. I nudged my hand toward the edge of the bench and watched a shadow mirror the motion, reaching across the floor toward him. I expected him to notice. He didn't. I froze. My shadow's fingers brushed his shadow's fingers, the connection lingering like it was alive, and then it pulled back just enough to keep the movement subtle, unnoticeable, but still there. I tried to ignore it. We walked through the exhibits, and every time we stopped, my shadow slid across the floor to his, curling around his like it had a mind of its own. Even when we sat apart on the benches, my shadow reached. Even when I turned my back to him for a painting, it followed, winding around him, fingers brushing fingers in a silent, impossible handshake. The gallery was dim, but it wasn't dark enough to hide what I was seeing. I started to notice the other shadows in the room. Most were normal, stretching lazily along the floor or the walls, sticking to their owners. But mine and his acted differently. They had this subtle tension, this quiet insistence. Every small movement I made, my shadow reacted, but instead of mirroring me, it leaned toward him. I tried testing it. I stepped a few feet away, enough that no light distortion could account for it, and watched. My shadow moved like it was stretching, reaching for his, and when I turned to look, I realized his shadow wasn't attached to his own movements anymore. It was holding my shadow's hand. Firm, calm, unnervingly deliberate. I couldn't stop staring. My stomach sank as I realized I wasn't imagining this. It wasn't light. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't the gallery somehow playing tricks. The shadows were independent, aware, and they were holding hands. I tried walking around, circling him, but no matter where I went, my shadow found his. Sometimes it slithered along the floor to his, other times it stretched across walls or ceiling, following angles that shouldn't have been possible. When I stopped, it waited, paused midair, mid-angle, just holding. He never noticed. He smiled at paintings, commented on colors, moved his own hands over canvases, completely unaware that our shadows were entwined, like some silent, stubborn tether that no one else could see. I thought about leaving. I thought about just walking out and ignoring the entire date. But every time I shifted toward the exit, my shadow stayed, holding his, stretching across the space, tugging subtly like it wanted me to stay. The gallery seemed bigger, more oppressive. Hallways extended, shadows of chandeliers elongated into impossible spikes. My shadow pulled at me, forcing me back toward him. I tried sitting down again, hoping proximity would calm whatever was happening. It didn't. My shadow coiled, wound around his holding firm. And then I noticed something worse. It started mirroring his slight movements, subtle tilts of the head, bends of the wrist, as it was learning me, learning us, learning this. I wanted to touch him, wanted to reach out physically to feel some grounding reality. But my hands felt heavier than usual, stiff, and when I raised them, my shadow's hand didn't mirror it entirely. It leaned toward his shadow, keeping our connection even as my body moved in real space. Other visitors passed by, oblivious. Their shadows stayed with them, ordinary, harmless. No one noticed us. Maybe no one could. It felt like the shadows were a private thing, a secret ritual my date and I were now forced into. And the strangest part was that he never reacted. He didn't seem aware, didn't seem bothered, didn't seem anything. Calm, serene, untouchable in a way that terrified me more than anger or fear could have. I started testing distances. I moved to the far side of the gallery near a corner, far from all light sources that might be stretching the shadows unnaturally. And still my shadow reached, curling along the floor, up walls, around pedestals. It held his. Fingers locked, a subtle squeeze. Impossible angles, impossible lengths, but firm and consistent. I couldn't even talk to him about it. I didn't dare. The idea that I would say something aloud felt insane. Who would believe me? What would they think? That I was imagining, hallucinating? But my stomach tightened every time I looked at him, every time I glanced down. The shadow hands didn't lie. We moved into a room of sculptures. There was this tall bronze figure in the center, lights angled just right. My shadow had to stretch over the sculpture to reach his. It bent and twisted in ways that would have broken any normal shadow. It moved like a living thing, aware, deliberate. His shadow did the same, keeping them connected. I started noticing details in how the shadows interacted. Subtle squeezes, tiny movements that suggested the shadows weren't passive. There was a rhythm, a pulse, a breathing. Almost human, almost aware in the way it waited, held, and adjusted. By the time we left the gallery, the streetlights had changed. Shadows outside seemed normal at first, then I realized mine followed the same pattern. Even as we walked side by side, a few feet apart, our shadows found each other, holding hands across the concrete, across the cracks in the sidewalk. I wanted to break free. I tried walking backward, zigzagging, shaking my hands, waving wildly. Nothing worked. The shadows remained. Unbroken, unrelenting, calm. I felt exhausted, weighed down by this silent tether. We stopped near a small cafe. I wanted coffee just to ground myself, to feel something normal. My shadow ignored it. It stayed with his. I couldn't look away. And the longer I stared, the more I realized I wasn't just connected in that moment. Something permanent had shifted. The shadows weren't casual extensions of our bodies anymore. They were a single entity spanning two people, and I had no idea what that meant. I tried talking to him casually, steering the conversation, but my eyes were glued to the shadows. I noticed him glance down, maybe catching something in the corner of his eye, but he didn't comment. Maybe he didn't see. Maybe he did. Either way, the shadows held hands, and that was the only truth I could be certain of. When we finally parted ways, I walked to my car, watching the distance between us grow. But even then, the shadows lingered. The last stretch of streetlight caught our forms, and there they were, still connected, still holding hands, even though in real space we were separate. I drove home, and for hours afterward, the image stayed with me. Every shadow I saw, every silhouette, made my stomach twist. I couldn't shake the idea that somewhere, his shadow and mine were still holding hands, reaching across dimensions I didn't understand, tethering me to something unexplainable. Even now, when I pass streetlights or catch my reflection in windows I watch, I half expect my shadow to move on its own, to find another, to stretch impossibly long fingers toward someone else. And I know I'll never sit in that gallery again without thinking about it, without remembering how something as simple as a shadow could become something impossible, relentless, and quietly terrifying. I had been looking forward to this date for days. It was the kind of place I normally went to, small, tucked away diner with a weird charm, the kind of place that smelled like fried food and nostalgia at the same time. He picked it out, claiming it was special, and I figured maybe it would be fine. At first, it was fine. He seemed normal, laughed at the right moments, ordered without asking what I wanted, which annoyed me a little. I shrugged it off. He didn't touch his food. At least, that's what I noticed at first. He picked at a salad for a second, then pushed the plate slightly toward me. I thought maybe he was nervous, or maybe he just didn't like eating in public, but I noticed his plate stayed full. No matter how much he pushed the food around, no matter how he scooped it onto his fork, the portion never changed. Every time he took a bite, the same amount was there again, like the plate was a loop. I laughed nervously, assuming I was imagining it. My hands were full with my own plate anyway, and I tried to focus on my food. But then, when I glanced back, he had moved his fork through the salad like he'd been eating for 10 minutes straight, and the pile of lettuce was exactly the same. I tried not to stare. I tried to ignore it. But the longer we sat, the more obvious it became. Bread rolls he didn't touch kept rolling back onto his plate, perfectly warm. Drinks stayed full. Ice untouched. Sauces untouched. Nothing disappeared. He didn't even need to look at the plate, didn't need to do anything special. The food simply persisted. My stomach started twisting. It was one of those feelings that begins as a twinge and turns into a pressure, a pressing certainty that something is off, and you can't explain why. I watched him move his fork again, slicing through a tomato, and the tomato was whole the next second. A tiny part of me wanted to ask, but another, larger part of me was frozen in place, staring at the impossible plate. I tried to eat faster, hoping if I focused on my own food, I could drown out the weirdness. But the more I ate, the more aware I became of the contrast. My plate emptied normally. Crumbs fell, sauces mixed, liquid sloshed, and across from me, his plate remained an untouched island of food, static and perfect, unbothered by his hands. The waiter came by once, checking if we needed anything. He lingered a little too long, eyes flicking between us, and I felt like he was watching more than just the meal. It wasn't a judgment, not exactly. It was recognition. Like he had seen this before, like it was supposed to happen. And then he left without asking a single question. Time began to stretch. Minutes became long, heavy things like the air in the diner had thickened. My date kept moving food from plate to mouth, fork to mouth, slicing, stabbing, chewing, but nothing diminished. I could see it. The pile might shift, items rotate in place, but the amount never lessened. The thought hit me suddenly and violently. It wasn't about food. It was about control. It was about being in a situation where the world around you didn't obey the rules you thought existed. I tried to joke, to bring it back to normal. I said things in my head about how ridiculous it was, how food was supposed to disappear, how physics worked, but nothing helped. Every time I looked away for just a second, the plate was just as full, maybe even more full, like a visual taunt. I noticed other diners were starting to seem blurry at the edges, their conversations dipping in and out like echoes. The smell of frying food became sharper, more cloying, like it was pressing against my senses. Every time I tried to meet his eyes, he looked back calmly, completely aware that I was noticing, completely unaffected by the fact that his plate was an unending puzzle in front of me. I thought about leaving. I even started reaching for my bag, planning my exit, but the door seemed farther away than before. The diner stretched, tables bending slightly in impossible ways, the lighting dimming, brightening, dimming again. I realized I wasn't alone in noticing strangeness anymore. Other tables had the same pattern. Men and women at the next row over, eating, moving utensils, yet plates never diminishing. Small movements, subtle but undeniably unnatural. He smiled slightly, the first real emotion, and it made my stomach knot further. Not menacing, not cruel, just calm, like he was demonstrating something, and I was the only one who had yet to understand it. I felt trapped in a slow loop, like the diner was a bubble separate from the real world, and my date was somehow the center of it. As the night dragged on, my own sense of time fractured. 10 minutes might have been an hour. An hour might have been 10 minutes. My phone, which I tried checking to ground myself, showed the same time every time I looked. The date kept moving food calmly, endlessly, and I couldn't process what was happening. It wasn't just uncanny. It was deliberate. It felt targeted. I started to notice patterns in how the food refilled. Red rolls always landed in the same spot. A tiny slice of cucumber would rotate clockwise when replaced. Sauces dripped into the same pattern they had started with. It was meticulous, obsessive. And I realized, horrified, that someone, or something, was aware of everything I did, and nothing I did could stop it. I tried looking away, tried focusing on the music on the street outside, anything to anchor myself. But every time I glanced back, his plate moved with him, fork dancing, food constant. And the more I tried to ignore it, the heavier my chest became, as if the air itself was pushing me down, pressing me to watch, forcing me to notice. The diner felt smaller, the ceiling lower, the walls closer. I noticed details in my surroundings I hadn't before. The condensation on glasses not touched, chairs slightly misaligned, the smell of oil sharper, more personal. It was like everything had tuned itself to me, waiting for me to see the impossible plate. By the time the dessert menu came, I was shaking slightly. My date didn't even glance at it. He reached out to tap the menu, and when I looked at his plate, I noticed that the slice of cake I thought he had taken the first bite from was completely untouched, frosting perfect, crumbs unbroken. The fork covered in midair for a second, and when it landed, a bite disappeared, then immediately reappeared as though reality itself had no jurisdiction over that plate. I stopped trying to eat my own food entirely. I stared. My body felt heavy, my chest tight, like I had been holding my breath for hours. The diner faded around the edges. I could feel the heat from the kitchen pressing through the walls, and the smell became almost unbearable. He finally looked at me directly, and in that moment I realized there was no malice, no play, just calm inevitability. He wasn't doing anything. He didn't need to. The plate itself was endless, and he was simply participating in a natural law I had never seen before, and now was trapped inside. I don't remember leaving the diner. I remember walking vaguely to my car, the street empty in a way that didn't make sense. Headlights passed, car sounded muted. My own plate, my own food, had disappeared in the blur of movement, but his plate and him stuck with me in my mind, constant and unyielding. Even now, weeks later, I think about it every time I sit down to eat. I can't get the image out of my head. The fork moving, the food unchanged, the calm expression, the sense that no matter what I did, nothing could alter that plate. It wasn't a person who was disturbing. It wasn't the choice of date. It was the impossibility of something so normal made unreal, made endless, and my own helplessness in the face of it. I stopped going to small diners after that. It sits in the back of my mind like it sat on the table that night, always full, always there, a quiet horror I didn't ask for, but that won't leave. I thought it was going to be a normal Friday night. I met in downtown, somewhere I hadn't been before, a restaurant with low lights and old brick walls that looked cool in pictures. The kind of place that makes you feel like you're in a movie, except it never felt like a movie, just me hoping this wouldn't be awful. He was quiet, but not in a bad way, and I figured I could handle a couple of hours without dying of awkwardness. The food came, the conversation was fine at first. A few jokes, some stories about school and work, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the night went on, I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. His hands hovered over mine for a second too long when passing dishes. His eyes lingered in ways that made me adjust in my seat. Still, nothing I could call out. It was just weird, just a weird energy I couldn't shake. Then it happened. The check arrived. I figured he'd handle it. He had insisted earlier, saying he wanted to treat me. But when I looked at the receipt, something made my stomach drop. The total was already paid, which was odd because he didn't hand me a card, didn't get up, didn't do anything. It was just covered. But it wasn't just the total. The line items made my skin crawl. There were things I didn't order, things I didn't even say yes to, a bottle of expensive wine I hadn't touched, a dessert I didn't recognize, some elaborate appetizer with ingredients I didn't eat. Every line item had my name next to it, like I had agreed, like I had nodded and smiled and said yes, when in reality I had done nothing. I checked my bag, half expecting my card to be gone, but it was there, untouched. My phone was on the table, untouched. He sat across from me, calm, like none of this was strange, like the fact that the restaurant had billed me for things I hadn't even asked for was normal. I tried to laugh it off, tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a system glitch, some weird promotion they ran, something technical. But then the waiter returned and placed a second receipt in front of me, lower in the pile, like a warning or a confirmation. It had more items, things I would never even eat, things that weren't on the first receipt. Again, every single one had my name. Every single one. I wanted to stand up, ask questions, demand an explanation, but my legs felt like they were sinking into the chair. The restaurant felt suddenly larger, darker. The low hum of music that had been background noise before now seemed like a soundtrack to something I couldn't comprehend. Everyone else in the restaurant was looking, not directly, but with the faintest tilt of their heads, the smallest narrowing of eyes, like they knew what had happened, and I hadn't realized it yet. He smiled at me, calm, almost satisfied. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't know how he had done this. I didn't know why the check was already paid, or why every item was associated with me. And then when I finally met his gaze, I realized he didn't need to explain. He didn't have to say a word. The way he was looking at me made it clear. This was normal to him, whatever this was. My mind raced. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe he had somehow set this up with the restaurant. Maybe I'd agreed to something earlier without thinking. But no, I remembered everything, every movement, every word. Nothing. Nothing like this had happened before. I glanced around, trying to catch a waiter or even a random customer, hoping for some human reaction, some sign that this was abnormal. But everyone else was perfectly calm. Some people were eating, some pucking quietly, all of them acting like this had happened before. Like this had happened 100 times, and it was just another night. My stomach churned. I tried to focus on the table again, on the receipts, on what I could touch. I looked closer at the items. Some of them weren't even things on the menu. They were elaborate, impossible, dishes that required ingredients I didn't think existed in the city. The prices were ridiculous, like the sum was more than I'd ever spent in a single night in my life. He leaned back, hands crossed, watching me struggle. There was no malice in his expression, just calm, just certainty. The kind that made me feel like I was already trapped in a reality I didn't understand. I tried to ignore it, tried to push my panic down. Maybe if I just finished the night, got home, it would make sense later. But the more I stared at the receipt, the more my mind caught on details that didn't add up. The timing of each item was strange. The wine appeared first, then the appetizer, then dessert, all before we had even ordered. It was that the restaurant was moving backward or forward, or maybe outside of time entirely, and I had been placed in it without consent. He suggested we go somewhere else after, a bar nearby, and I followed mechanically. The receipt stayed in my mind, the way they listed things I didn't approve, the way every total seemed arbitrary yet certain. I felt like I was being cataloged, assessed, counted in a ledger I never agreed to join. On the way, I tried to focus on the street, on the lights, on people walking by. I tried to anchor myself in reality. But the memory of that check stayed. The way my name was printed over impossible meals, my signature implied somewhere invisible, my presence confirmed before I had even agreed to it. I couldn't shake it. The bar was dim, cozy, nothing like the restaurant. I thought maybe here I could breathe, reset, and forget. But I kept thinking about the check, about every line, about how it was already paid before I could refuse. The waiter at the bar smiled when we sat, and I swear for a moment I felt recognition in his eyes, like he had seen this before, like he understood exactly what had happened in the restaurant. I tried to talk to my date, tried to make sense of it. But every sentence in my head came out wrong, jumbled, swallowed by the memory of that impossible receipt. It wasn't just food. It was the sensation of consent, the illusion of choice, stolen in a way that made me feel both present and erased at the same time. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. Drinks were ordered, none of them on any receipt. The bar was quieter, smaller, safer, but I couldn't escape the feeling. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the dishes. It was about control. The receipts had shown me how easily reality could be rewritten, how easily I could be cataloged into something I didn't consent to. Finally, we left. I stepped outside, the night air cool, streets buzzing with life. I felt relief at first. Freedom. But then my hand brushed my bag, and the receipts were still there in my mind, printed across them, not in ink, but in something heavier, a mark that said, "You belong to this night, to this choice, whether you agree or not." I don't go to restaurants like that anymore. I avoid dim lights, brick walls, fancy menus. I still think about that night, about the check that was already paid, about the things I never agreed to, about how easily the world can pretend you consent. The memory sits heavy, a quiet pressure I carry in my chest, a reminder that sometimes the worst part of a date isn't the person. It's the reality that can be manipulated around you while you sit there, helpless. The night ended, but the receipts never did. I thought I was being smart. I picked a new restaurant downtown. Trendy but quiet, somewhere I could feel like myself and not worry too much about the awkwardness of a first date. He seemed normal enough at first, smiling, ordering a drink, glancing at his phone, polite. The usual. I figured I could handle an hour, maybe two, of polite chatter before I made my exit. The moment we sat down, I felt something off. Nothing I could put my finger on, not yet. The waiter was cheerful but hesitant, like he knew we didn't belong there. I laughed it off. Maybe it was just the vibe of the place, too fancy, too dimly lit. We ordered drinks, and the conversation started. Then he said it. He leaned in slightly and said he could show me the future. At first I thought it was a joke, some cheesy line. I smiled, half rolling my eyes. I didn't want to encourage anything weird, but the way he said it, calm, serious like he was certain it was possible, made the air between us thicken. I laughed awkwardly, but I noticed it immediately afterward. The waiter glanced over, frowned subtly. A couple at the next table stopped mid-conversation and stared. My pulse picked up. I thought maybe it was coincidence, just random glances. But then more people started looking, and their expressions weren't neutral. It was disgust, disappointment, judgment. I didn't understand, until I noticed it wasn't just looks. The way the waiter dropped the silverware, the subtle hesitations in the other tables, the faint muttering behind menus, they all knew. They all knew I had already made some horrible choice, even though I hadn't done anything yet. He smiled at me, calm, satisfied. He said he could show me the future again. I didn't move. My chest tightened. The moment stretched. The air felt heavy, and suddenly I realized I couldn't move either. The space around me felt smaller. Everyone around us, waiters, diners, even the bartender in the corner, acted like I was already guilty of something unspeakable. My hands gripped the table. I tried to laugh it off. Tried to convince myself it was paranoia. But the looks intensified. A man at a table near the window shook his head slowly, lips pressed tight. A woman sipped her water, eyes wide, like she just witnessed me do something unforgivable. The waiter's smile was polite but strained. It was judgment, heavy, palpable. I tried asking him to stop, to explain, to just act normal. Nothing changed. The more I protested, the more the room seemed to shift. Chairs seemed closer, shadows stretched longer. I felt like a spotlight had been turned on me, though the room was dim. And the future he promised wasn't a vision or a show. It was this, the knowledge of everyone around me, the certainty that I had failed before anything even happened. He told me to relax, that he could show me the future. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The people around us subtly blocked the exits. Servers moved just slightly in the way. Menus shifted. Chairs angled to make passage harder without drawing attention. My heart raced, and I realized it didn't matter if I stood up. The future had me trapped in this moment, and the room itself enforced it. I started noticing details I hadn't before. Every couple in the restaurant had the same tension, the same quiet awareness. Their conversations were stiff, fractured. Every glance they threw my way carried judgment. I felt like I had already failed at everything, even though we just sat down. He suggested again, quietly, that he could show me. The words weren't loud, but they carried weight, the kind of weight that presses into your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I realized then that the future he offered wasn't some magical vision. It was the room reacting to a truth only he could manipulate, that I had already made choices that doomed me, that everyone could see it, that I was powerless to change it. I tried to focus on anything else, the tablecloth, the candle, the pattern in the floor tiles. But the future was everywhere. It seeped into the air, into the server's eyes, into the quiet murmurs behind menus. Every small action I took was judged, dissected, cataloged. I could feel it in my chest. It was suffocating. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My date remained calm, patient, like nothing mattered except demonstrating the inevitability of what was coming. The music in the restaurant didn't change, but it felt heavier, slower, like the soundtrack to a failure I hadn't even committed yet. I noticed a waiter drop a tray of glasses, and no one looked shocked. Everyone glanced briefly, then returned to their muted judgment. I realized the restaurant itself was complicit. The building, the people, even the air was aligned to enforce this vision of the future. The knowledge of my failure radiated, and I could feel it in every glance, every gesture. He smiled at me again, quietly, and I felt my knees go weak. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only sit and let the weight of inevitability press down. The future wasn't about what was going to happen. It was about how everyone around me already saw it. They knew and they would never forgive, never forget. I started to imagine what that meant beyond this restaurant. If this future could seep into a small, quiet place like this, what about everywhere else? What if people outside were already aware, already judging, already condemning me for choices I hadn't made? The thought twisted in my stomach. I tried standing, tried pushing past the tables, tried demanding answers. The room subtly adjusted. Chairs shifted. A couple glanced my way, blocking the path with their presence. The waiter smiled faintly as he approached our table, placing a hand on the edge. Not threatening, just confirming that the future was fixed. I felt like the air itself was heavier. Each breath burned. The music, the flickering candle, the muted voices, they all whispered of consequences I could neither avoid nor understand. And he just sat there, calm, offering me glimpses of what everyone already knew. Time stretched further. I lost track of drinks, of the plate in front of me. The food cooled and hardened. I didn't care. I couldn't care. The room existed solely to remind me that I had already failed. Each movement, each blink, each attempt to escape was met with subtle resistance. The future wasn't coming. It was here. I realized I would never forget the look on the faces around me, the faint nods of the waiters, the subtle shakes of heads at other tables, the muted expressions of couples sharing meals. They were all complicit, aware, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to focus on my date on him, maybe to ground myself, but even he was part of it. Calm, patient, guiding me, reinforcing the inevitability. The moment I understood it, I felt the air thicken, like recognition of my realization triggered something worse. When we finally left, though I don't know how long we had been there, the world outside felt distant, sharp, overwhelming. The city moved around me, people walking, lights flashing, cars passing. It should have been normal, but it wasn't. The knowledge from inside followed me. The memory of how everyone had already known, already judged, already condemned me, stuck like a shadow. I tried to shake it off as we walked away, tried to act like nothing had happened, but I couldn't. The future he showed wasn't a prediction. It was an imprint, a permanent awareness, a mark on my perception that made me certain the world had already seen everything I could never undo. And even now, months later, every time I meet someone new, every time I walk into a restaurant, every time I see a crowd, I feel it. The quiet judgment, the certainty that the future isn't something you wait for. It's something people already know, something I already failed at, and they already know. The memory of that night is heavier than any ordinary first date disaster could ever be. I still remember walking into that little cafe, the one tucked into the corner of a street I barely knew existed. It was raining, the kind of rain that leaves the pavement shiny and the air smelling like wet concrete and wet leaves. I had already decided to go on this date, even though a part of me didn't want to. I figured a quiet cave, a warm drink, maybe some conversation would be fine. Nothing scary could happen there. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small round table near the window. The light from the street lamps made everything look soft and yellowish. He waved when he saw me, smiled like nothing was off, like he hadn't already spent hours memorizing my face or deciding what to say first. I shrugged off the unease, sat down, and smiled back. The first drink came, and we started talking. The usual first date stuff, nothing heavy. Music in the background, low and muffled. The smell of coffee and pastries. I thought I was fine, mostly. Then it happened. He said a name, not mine. A soft slip, almost gentle. I froze. Maybe I misheard. Maybe it was someone in the cave, someone's voice bouncing off the walls. But he kept talking, smiling politely, and then quietly added sorry. Just a whisper, barely audible, that it was there. I blinked, tried to focus, forced myself to breathe normally. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was nerves. I kept my hands folded on the table. The name lingered in my ears. And then he did it again. A different name. Again, followed by that soft sorry. My stomach twisted. I wanted to laugh, to say something, to leave. Anything. Instead, I just nodded, pretending like I didn't notice. I focused on my drink, the way the steam curled up into the air, and tried to act normal. He didn't stop. Every few minutes, a new name slipped out, always followed by the quiet apology. Always soft, like he was afraid I'd snap if it was louder. The first few names were calm and ordinary. Then they started to feel familiar. I didn't know these people, but his voice made the names cling to the edges of my memory. Familiar, like I should recognize them, but couldn't place them. I looked around the cafe. Nothing seemed off. Other people were talking, tapping on laptops, sipping lattes. They didn't see it. They didn't hear it. It was just me and him and the names. I tried to make myself focus on something else. The table, the candle flickering, the rain streaking the window. Anything. But every time I thought I was safe, another name would come out, soft, apologetic, slipping into the space between us. I asked myself how someone could forget your name over and over. It made no sense. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he had a weird memory problem. But then I noticed the pattern. The names weren't random. They weren't childish mistakes. They were deliberate. He knew he was doing it. The apology proved it. He knew. My chest started to tighten. I felt heat creep up my neck. The air in the cafe seemed heavier, the light slightly dimmer. My eyes darted to the exit, then back to him. He caught my gaze, smiled faintly, like he knew exactly what I was thinking and didn't care. I tried talking, steering the conversation, asking questions, making small jokes. Nothing worked. Every few minutes, another name. Always soft, always sorry, and each one dug into me like he was carving away pieces of who I was. I couldn't stop thinking about the names. They weren't just names. They were pieces of other people's lives, memories I didn't have, histories I couldn't see. He was calling me them, dragging me into something I didn't understand, and I hated that it worked. I hated that my mind tried to place faces, tried to find connections, even when I knew there were none. The coffee went cold. I didn't care. The pastry I had ordered sat untouched. I couldn't eat. My stomach was tight with dread, my throat dry. The soft, apologetic names kept coming, one after the other, relentless. I noticed that each apology sounded different. Some whispered, some almost a sigh, some more like a breath drawn too fast. Each one tailored, precise, like he had rehearsed it for years, like he had known exactly what it would do. I tried to get up. I tried to leave. The door seemed farther than it should have been. Each step forward felt heavier, like gravity had doubled. He didn't stop me, didn't move, didn't acknowledge. Just sat there, smiling softly, eyes fixed on me. And the names kept coming. I realized I couldn't escape them. They weren't just words. They were pressure, subtle but constant. They made the room smaller, the walls closer. I pressed my hands to the table, trying to anchor myself. My pulse spiked, sensing with the rhythm of each soft apology. He mentioned a name I almost recognized. My stomach dropped. My hands shook. The way he said it, just soft enough to pass as a slip, made my hair stand on end. I tried to imagine it was a coincidence. It wasn't. It couldn't be. Hours passed, though I had no idea how long. The cafe emptied around us. Servers moved silently, eyes down, not meeting mine. The rain stopped. The music changed, lighter now, almost cheery. But nothing could break the tension. Nothing could drown out the names. He didn't miss a beat. Each name came at its time, carefully spaced, deliberate. No pattern I could see. No rhyme or reason I could understand. Just a constant drip, a quiet erosion of who I was in that moment. I realized that by the end, I didn't even know my own name. It felt foreign, like an outline I could see but not touch. Every time I thought of it, another name pushed it down, whispered over it, replaced it for just a second, then disappeared, leaving the echo of this soft sorry. I wanted to leave, but my body wouldn't move. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I wanted to cry, but the tears refused. It was like the cafe had swallowed everything I brought in with me, my courage, my identity, my ability to react, and replaced it with this unrelenting barrage of whispered apologies and other names. He leaned back at some point, not stopping, just watched. Quiet, polite, patient. I couldn't look at him. Couldn't look away. The air was too thick. The quiet apologies too precise. The names too many. When someone finally entered the cave, a new customer, a loud voice, the illusion cracked. The spell of the evening faltered for a moment. The soft tension broke slightly, and I realized I could move. Just barely. My limbs felt heavy, but I could breathe again. I got up, left my bag on the chair, and walked out. Rain had returned, wet and sharp. The street felt real again, cold against my hands. The city was loud. Life carried on. But even now, whenever I hear a name not even close to mine, I flinch. Whenever someone whispers something apologetically softly under their breath, I feel it again. The unease, the pressure, the quiet terror of being called someone else over and over, each one slipping into your life like it belongs. The cafe is gone now, torn down, replaced with a small bookstore. But I can't forget. I can't forget how every name he called me didn't belong, and how the apologies weren't for mistakes. They were for me, for the person I thought I was, slowly unmaking me. I never thought I'd end up at a place like that. It started out as a normal Friday night plan, grab a bite, see if there was anything to like about the guy sitting across from me. He seemed okay at first, maybe even boring enough to feel safe. That was the problem. Everything that seemed safe that night turned out to be the opposite. We walked into the restaurant, which looked normal from the outside. Neon sign flickering, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, the decor was cozy, soft lamps, cushioned chairs, that smell of frying food mixed with candle wax. The host smiled at us, ushered us in like we were expected. The moment we sat, I noticed how crowded it was. Every table taken, people staring at menus, avoiding each other's eyes. At first, I didn't think much of it. The place was busy fine. Then I realized every couple there was stiff, silent, or arguing softly. It was subtle at first. Just a glance, a tense lean away, a fork tapping on the plate a bit too hard. I kept looking around, thinking maybe my date and I were just awkward, but no, the feeling was unanimous. Every table had a tension that smelled like burnt toast. I tried to shake it off. Maybe people just had bad nights. I focused on my date, asked about his work, tried to sound interested while sipping the water. The weird thing was, he seemed normal too, at least at first. A little quiet, a little awkward, but not alarming. Then he laughed at a joke I didn't make. Just a laugh. Offbeat, like he'd heard a line in his head and needed to fill the silence. I shrugged. Maybe I imagined it. Then the waiter came, not smiling, not looking at us like anyone else mattered, just handed over menus. My date opened it. I did too. The food looked fine, normal. I was still scanning the room when it hit me. The waiter wasn't leaving. Not really. Just hovering, subtle like a shadow. I glanced at him, shrugged, tried to ignore it. That's when it started. He leaned in, whispered something that didn't sound like words, more like a vibration through the air. My chest tightened. I wanted to laugh it off, but my heart was already picking up. I looked around. The other couples were shifting too, moving slightly as if sensing the same thing. I thought I was imagining it. Then when the couples at the far end of the room got up, they tried to leave. The waiter blocked them. Quietly. Politely, but firm. They froze. A tense exchange, words not said. A chair scraped back. The couple sat down, defeated. The look in their eyes made my stomach twist. I realized something terrible. We weren't allowed to leave. I turned to my date. He was pale, mouth tight, like he was processing it too late. I tried to make a joke, tried to get him to move, but my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the room. The waiter smiled faintly, and my pulse jumped. I scanned the tables. Everyone was caught the same way. Some couples whispered under their breath. Others fidgeted. One girl pushed a napkin across the table, hitting her date's hand. He didn't notice. I realized then that the restaurant wasn't just busy. It was a trap. The waiter approached our table again, leaned down slightly, and gestured toward the menu. I stared, trying to act casual. That's when I noticed the subtle changes in the room. The lights dimmed slightly when we shifted in our seats. The music, soft at first, began to pound faintly, matching my heartbeat. I forced myself to breathe normally, but the thump in the background synchronized with my rising panic. He suggested ordering. I nodded, too afraid to argue. I didn't want to notice what was happening, but the words on the menu seemed to ward, rearranged slightly as if mocking me. I ordered, voice shaking. He did too. The waiter scribbled on a pad, then walked off. I thought we'd be safe, but when he returned, it wasn't our order. It was something grotesque. Nothing I recognized. Nothing I wanted. He slid the plates onto the table, smiling faintly, like he knew something we didn't. My stomach turned, but before I could push it away, I noticed the other tables. Every couple was eating something awful. grimacing, picking at food they didn't want. The room had changed. Shadows were longer, angles sharper, the air thick. I realized then that no one was leaving because the restaurant fed off it. The tension, the discomfort, the fear. I looked at my date. He avoided my eyes. His hand trembled slightly. The first bite of my food tasted like cardboard soaked in bitter coffee. I forced myself to chew, to swallow, just to see if it would get easier. It didn't. Every couple reacted the same. Whispers of disgust, sighs of frustration, silent pleas that went unanswered. No one was allowed to leave until someone won. I didn't understand what winning meant. Maybe it was surviving, maybe it was keeping composure, maybe it was something worse. But the waiter's eyes followed us all the same, judging, waiting. The longer we sat, the heavier the air became. Conversations failed. Jokes didn't land. Movements were stiff. My pulse raced, the background thump of the music sensing with every heartbeat, every anxious swallow. I tried to focus on something, anything else, but my eyes kept catching the others. The despair on each face, the quiet panic, the occasional tear. Then it hit me. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a game. Every couple a participant. Every table a challenge. And the rules were simple. Survive long enough to be declared the winner. Except no one knew the conditions. Except the waiter knew. I looked at my date. He glanced at me, expression blank. I tried to signal, to figure out if he understood. His eyes flicked toward the far wall, where a couple had started arguing loudly. The waiter approached them slowly, calm, unhurried. The arguing couple stopped immediately, silent again, faces pale. I realized that losing had consequences we didn't even want to think about. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell exactly how. The room blurred into a haze of muted colors, soft sounds of cutlery against plates, quiet murmurs. The tension never left. The game continued. I noticed people trying to strategize silently. Small movements, testing the boundaries, seeing if they could slip out. None succeeded. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. I tried not to look at the winner board or whatever it was. I didn't know if it existed. I didn't want to know. The idea of someone succeeding at this, of someone leaving, made my stomach knot. Every victory was someone else's misery amplified. My date shifted, hand brushing against mine for the first time. I tensed, realizing it didn't matter. Touch didn't matter. Presence didn't matter. Nothing mattered except staying until we weren't allowed to any more, until someone somewhere declared a winner. I kept thinking about how normal it all had looked from the outside, how inviting, how simple. A place for a meal, a first date, a night out. I had walked in thinking nothing of it. I had never considered that the place itself could be hostile, sentient in its own quiet, patient way. We tried talking, whispering strategies, ways to bluff, ways to escape. The room absorbed every idea, every thought. Nothing changed. The rules didn't bend. The air thickened around our hesitation, our indecision. Eventually, we just ate in silence. Not because we wanted to, because we had to. The plates were heavy, the food tasteless, the room oppressive. I noticed my date's hands gripping the edge of the table tightly, knuckles white. I realized mine did the same. When I finally stepped outside, long after what felt like forever, the night air was sharp and real. My heart pounded, disconnected from the rhythm inside. I didn't look back. I just kept walking until the lights of the restaurant disappeared behind me, swallowed by the normal streets. Every time I hear faint music in a restaurant, every time I sense tension thick in the air, I think about that place. The rules, the winners, the ones who never left, and I hope I never end up back there. I noticed the music before I noticed anything else, and that's saying something because I'm usually the last person to pick up on background stuff. It was one of those places that tries too hard to feel calm. Low lights, plants everywhere, candles on the tables even though it was still early. The kind of restaurant people recommend when they say they want something chill. I didn't even want to go out that night, but I was tired of sitting in my room, tired of the same walls where I live, tired of replaying old thoughts. I wanted a distraction. The song playing when I walked in was slow and soft, almost sleepy. A steady beat barely there. It felt like it was meant to fade into nothing, like white noise you forget about. I remember thinking it was nice. Grounding. I didn't know then that'd be coming every beat before the night was over. He was already there, sitting near the middle of the room. Normal guy. Normal smile. Nothing about him stood out in a bad way. I sat down across from him, put my bag on the floor, and tried to settle into the chair. The cushions were too firm, but I didn't mention it. The music kept playing. Soft. Slow. My heart matched it without me realizing. I felt calm enough. We talked. Nothing deep. Just the usual stuff. School, work, dumb things that fill silence. He laughed at the right times. Nodded when I talked. Everything felt slightly rehearsed, but not enough to matter. Then something small shifted. I don't know exactly when it happened. There wasn't a moment where alarms went off. It was more like a gradual tightening in my chest. I noticed my hands felt cold even though the room was warm. My knee started bouncing under the table. I forced it to stop. The music felt louder. Not actually louder, just more present. The beat stood out more, like someone had turned the volume up a notch. I glanced around to see if anyone else reacted. No one did. Everyone else looked relaxed, leaning back, talking easily. I focused on my breathing. Slow in, slow out. My heart rate picked up anyway. Not panic, just nerves. First dates do that. The song changed. It didn't stop and restart. It just shifted. The beat became slightly faster, the rhythm tighter, still subtle. Still easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But I was paying attention now. I checked my phone under the table, pretending to read something. My pulse was racing more than it should have been. I pressed my thumb against my wrist, just to be sure. It matched. The beat and the music lined up with the thud under my skin. Not perfectly, but close enough that my stomach flipped. I told myself it was coincidence. Lots of songs have similar tempos. My brain was just making patterns because I was already on edge. I tried to relax, leaned back in my chair, forced my shoulders down. My heart slowed. The music slowed with it. That's when real fear crept in. I sat up straight again, suddenly aware of every sound in the room. Plates clinking, glasses sliding, footsteps on the floor. Underneath it all, the music kept pulsing. Steady, patient. I didn't look at him. I didn't want to see if he noticed anything different. I focused on the table, the grain of the wood, the small scratch near my elbow. My thoughts started racing. Why did the music change like that? Was it some weird playlist? Was someone controlling it manually? Was this all in my head? My heart sped up again. The beat followed. Faster now. Not rushed, but urgent, like it was nudging me forward, pushing me towards something I didn't want. I finally looked at him. His expression hadn't changed. Still calm, still engaged. He was talking, but I barely processed what he was saying. My ears kept drifting back to the music. I realized then that the song wasn't just faster. It felt closer, like it was coming from inside my chest instead of the speakers. Each beat felt heavier, more deliberate. I shifted in my seat, uncomfortable. My breath came quicker. I hated that my body was betraying me like this. I hated that the room felt smaller now, tighter. The music sped up again. I felt dizzy. I pressed my feet flat against the floor, grounding myself. I told myself to calm down. Nothing bad was happening. I was safe. I was in public. Everything was fine. My heart didn't listen. Neither did the music. It wasn't just matching my heartbeat anymore. It was amplifying it. The beat grew sharper, more aggressive. Not loud, just insistent. Impossible to ignore. I looked around again. Still no reaction from anyone else. People laughed. Servers moved between tables. A couple nearby leaned close, smiling at each other. No one seemed aware that the entire room felt like it was breathing with me. I wondered if I was about to pass out. That thought alone sent my pulse skyrocketing. The music surged. I flinched at the sound, even though nothing had actually changed in volume. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air. I tried to slow my breathing, counting in my head. The beat stuttered, then followed my attempt, slowing slightly, then jumping again when my controls slipped. It was tracking me, adjusting in real time. I felt tears sting my eyes, more from frustration than fear. I hated how exposed I felt, like the room itself knew exactly how uncomfortable I was and decided to make it worse. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, standing up too quickly. My chair scraped loud against the floor. The sound made my heart spike again. The music reacted instantly. As I walked away from the table, the beat followed me. Not physically louder, but more intense, like it was locked onto me, refusing to let go. The bathroom was down a short hallway. The moment I pushed the door open and stepped inside, The music muffled slightly but didn't stop. The beat still came through the walls. It still matched my heart. I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge hard. My reflection looked pale, eyes wide. I pressed a hand to my chest and tried to breathe slowly, deliberately. The beat slowed with me. That confirmed it. There was no more denying it. This wasn't random. This wasn't anxiety playing tricks. Something was sensing to me. I splashed water on my face, hoping the cold would snap me out of it. My heart jumped at the shock. The music jumped too. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the urge to scream. I forced myself to stand still, to breathe evenly. It took longer than it should have, but eventually my pulse steadied. The beat settled into a slower rhythm again, calmer, waiting. I opened my eyes and stared at myself. I felt like prey that had just stopped running, hoping the thing chasing it would lose interest. I waited another minute, just to be sure. The music stayed steady. When I went back out, the moment I stepped into the dining area, the full weight of the sound hit me again. It felt like walking into a current. I sat back down, hands clenched in my lap. He looked at me concerned, but not alarmed. I nodded, pretending everything was fine. My heart began to race again the second I sat down. The music picked up faster than before. It felt almost mocking now, like it knew I was trying to ignore it. I realized then that I couldn't calm down while staying there. The more I tried to push through it, the worse it got. My body was trapped in a feedback loop with the room. I stood up again, and slower this time. Deliberate. My heart pounded anyway. The music surged, nearly frantic now. People started to notice then. Not me, but the sound. Heads tilted. A few faces frowned, confused. The sudden change was obvious now, even to them. That made my heart explode in my chest. The music went wild. The beat was fast, relentless, almost unbearable. It felt like it was crawling under my skin. I didn't care anymore. I grabbed my bag and walked. Not ran. Walked. Each step felt heavy, like moving through water. As I moved toward the exit, the music followed me, staying fast, staying locked in. The moment my hand touched the door handle, my heart skipped. The beat skipped with it. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The music cut off instantly. The silence hit me so hard I almost fell. My heart was still racing, but without the sound chasing it, it felt manageable. Real. Mine again. I stood there on the sidewalk, breathing hard, trying to get control. Inside, through the glass, I could see people looking around, confused, like something had just ended abruptly. I didn't go back in. I didn't explain. I didn't care. I walked until my heart slowed on its own, until my thoughts felt quieter. Even now, whenever I hear a steady beat in the background, I can't help checking my pulse, just to make sure it's not listening. I didn't believe her at first because I didn't want to. That's the honest truth. It's easier to laugh something off than to sit with it and let it sink in. I had already decided the date would be harmless, maybe awkward, probably forgettable. I told myself that while tying my shoes, while checking my reflection in the dark screen of my phone while walking to the place we picked. I needed it to be normal. We met at a late-night bookstore cafe that stayed open way too late for no good reason. Half the lights were always off, shelves packed tight, couches sagging like they had given up. It smelled like old paper and burnt espresso, the kind of place people go to avoid being alone without having to talk to anyone. She was sitting at a corner table surrounded by books she hadn't bought, not stacked neatly, spread out, open like she had been sampling pieces of them. She looked up when I got close and smiled in a calm way that didn't ask for anything. I sat down across from her and immediately felt like I was interrupting something already in progress. We ordered drinks and talked like normal people at first. Nothing strange. She asked about my classes, where I live, what I did when I couldn't sleep. I asked her the same kind of stuff. She answered easily but vaguely, like she was leaving things out on purpose. It wasn't uncomfortable yet, just uneven. At some point, while flipping through one of the books, she mentioned she could hear thoughts. Not dramatically. Not like she was building up to it. She said it the same way someone might mention they were bad at math or allergic to cats. Casual, almost bored. I laughed because that felt like the correct response. She didn't react to the laugh. She just nodded, like she expected it. I remember thinking that it was probably some kind of joke, or maybe she believed it herself in a harmless way. People say weird things on dates. It doesn't always mean anything. Then she leaned back slightly and responded to something I hadn't said. Not a guess, not a vague statement. A direct response to a thought that had just crossed my mind about the room being too quiet, about how I could hear my own breathing. She commented on that exact thing casually, like continuing a conversation. My smile froze. I told myself it was coincidence. The place was quiet. Anyone could notice that. I nodded along, pretending nothing had happened, but my chest felt tight. I tested it without meaning to. I thought about how her drink looked untouched, about how the foam had sunk in a weird way. She mentioned the drink a second later, mentioned the foam. My heart started pounding, not fast yet, just heavy. I shifted in my seat, tried to slow my thoughts down. That's harder than it sounds. Once you start paying attention to them, they multiply. Every stray idea feels louder. I focused on something random. The book cover near my elbow, the color of the table, the hum of the fridge behind the counter. She responded to that too. Not word for word, but close enough that my skin prickled. She talked about the hum being annoying, about the table feeling sticky. I hadn't touched the table with my hands. I stopped smiling. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. She looked relaxed, not smug, not excited, just observant. I thought about leaving, about standing up and walking out. The thought was sharp, urgent. She tilted her head and mentioned how sudden exits usually made things worse. My mouth went dry. I realized then that it wasn't just surface thoughts she was picking up. It was reactions, impulses, the stuff that happens before you decide what to do. I forced myself to think about nothing, just blank, white noise. She went quiet. That scared me more than anything else. The silence stretched. I could feel sweat at the back of my neck. I kept my face neutral, hoping she couldn't see how hard my heart was beating. Then my mind slipped, just for a second. I thought about how her eyes didn't blink as often as they should. She smiled wider and blinked, slow and deliberate. It felt like she was training me, like she was letting me see the connection so I would stop questioning it. I started thinking about safer things. Memories, old shows, random songs, anything that didn't matter. She reacted less then, like static interference. Her responses became more general, less precise. That's when I realized she was filtering, choosing what to acknowledge. The idea that someone could sort through my head like that made my stomach twist. I wondered how long she had been doing this, how many people sat across from her thinking their thoughts were private. She reacted to that thought too, not defensively, almost amused. She mentioned how people were louder than they realized, how most didn't even try to be quiet. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before, like being in a crowded room without clothes, except no one else could see it, just her. I started to feel tired, not sleepy, drained, like my brain was running too fast and burning itself out. Concentrating on not thinking took more energy than I had. She watched me closely now. Her attention sharpened when I struggled, like she was listening harder. I thought about my biggest insecurity without meaning to, the one I never talk about, the one that sits deep and quiet. She didn't comment on it right away. That pause was unbearable. Then she brought it up gently, indirectly, but there was no mistaking it. She framed it like an observation, like something obvious she had noticed. My hands clenched under the table. I wondered what she wanted, what the point of this was. She responded by talking about curiosity, about how hearing thoughts wasn't about control, just proximity, like standing too close to a speaker. I didn't believe that. I couldn't. I glanced around the cafe. People reading, typing, staring at their phones, all of them thinking things no one else could hear, except maybe they weren't. The idea spiraled fast. She cut in again, grabbing the thought, telling me not to generalize, that it didn't work like that it was specific. Specific to what? I didn't know. I checked my phone, pretending to read a notification. My hands were shaking. I thought about texting someone for help. She commented on how phones were bad shields. I felt something close to panic then, not full-blown, just the edge of it, like standing near a drop. I stood up abruptly. The chair scraped loud against the floor. A few people looked over. She stayed seated watching me. I thought about running. She mentioned how running thoughts were messy. I grabbed my bag and slung it over my shoulder. My movements felt jerky, disconnected. I thought about not looking back. She didn't respond to that one. I walked out into the night air, chest heaving, head buzzing. The street was quiet, lights reflecting off wet pavement. I kept walking, not stopping until the cafe was out of sight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know what it was. A message from her, probably responding to the thought I had just had about never wanting to see her again. I didn't open it. I turned my phone off completely and kept walking. When I got home, I sat on my bed in the dark, staring at my hands. My thoughts felt too loud now, like they had learned they could be heard. It took hours before they slowed down enough for me to sleep. Sometimes late at night, I still wonder if she hears me. Not because I believe it completely, but because a part of me can't prove she doesn't. The first sign something was off wasn't fear. It was embarrassment. The kind that hits for no clear reason, like when you think someone is staring at you, but you don't know why. I felt it walking into the place, this low heat in my face, like I was already messing something up. My outfit was fine. My hair was fine. I checked my phone reflection in the dark window just to be sure. Everything looked normal. I wasn't nervous in the usual way. It felt different, heavier, like I had walked into a room mid-argument without knowing the context. The restaurant was small but loud, tucked between a nail salon and a phone repair shop. The lights were warm, almost too warm, and the air smelled like fried food and sweet sauce. Tables were packed close together, chairs scraping constantly. It felt busy in a restless way, like no one planned to stay long. He waved when he saw me. Nothing strange about him. Normal clothes, normal smile, nothing that set off alarms. That almost made me relax. I slid into the chair across from him and put my bag at my feet, the strap looped around my ankle without thinking. We ordered food and talked. Surface-level stuff. School, work, dumb internet things. He laughed at the right moments. Nodded when he was supposed to. I remember thinking how smooth it all felt, like it was following a script I had already read somewhere. Then my stomach started to hurt. Non-sharp pain. More like pressure, like I needed air. I tried to ignore it, took a sip of my drink, told myself it was nerves or hunger. It didn't go away. It crawled higher into my chest, made my breaths feel shallow. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, mostly to get a second alone. The bathroom was empty when I went in, just one long mirror over the sinks, lights buzzing softly above it. The floor was sticky in places, like it hadn't been cleaned properly. I leaned forward and put my hands on the counter, staring at my reflection. I looked normal, a little pale, maybe, eyes a bit wide. I took a few slow breaths and waited for my heart to calm down. That's when I noticed something behind me. In the mirror over my shoulder, I could see the dining area. That wasn't weird by itself. The bathroom door didn't close all the way, and the angle lined up just right. What was weird was what I saw at the table. I was sitting there. Not like a reflection. Not delayed. Actually sitting in my chair at the table, hunched forward, hands gripping the edge. My face was twisted in a way I had never seen before. Mouth open wide. Eyes squeezed shut. I was screaming. I couldn't hear anything. The bathroom was silent except for the buzzing light. But in the mirror I could see it clearly. The strain in my neck, the tension in my shoulders, the kind of scream that empties your lungs. I spun around. The bathroom behind me was empty. The door was still cracked open. No sounds from the restaurant beyond the usual noise. No screaming. Nothing. I turned back to the mirror. It was still there. Me at the table screaming silently. People around the table were frozen. Heads turned toward me but not moving. My date was sitting there too, staring straight at me with an unreadable expression. Not shocked. Not concerned. Just watching. My knees felt weak. I grabbed the counter harder, fingers digging into the edge. My reflection in the mirror was still calm, still breathing, still standing in the bathroom. But behind me in the glass, I was breaking apart. I blinked hard. Once, twice. Nothing changed. I stepped closer to the mirror. The image stayed the same size, the same angle. It didn't react to me moving. It wasn't behaving like a reflection at all. It was like a window. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I looked away, squeezed my eyes shut, counted in my head. When I looked back, the mirror showed the bathroom again. Empty. Normal. I laughed quietly, more out of panic than relief. My face looked flushed now. I splashed some water on it, trying to reset my brain. I told myself it was stress, low blood sugar, too much caffeine, anything normal. I checked my phone. No messages. Only a few minutes had passed. I took one last look at the mirror. Just me. Just the sinks. Nothing else. I went back out. The moment I sat down, I felt wrong again. Not sick. Displaced. Like I was sitting half an inch off from where I was supposed to be. The noise of the place felt sharper. Lights brighter. My skin felt too tight. He looked at me and smiled. Asked if I was okay with his eyes. I nodded. The food came. I picked at it without tasting anything. My appetite was gone completely. My hands felt clumsy, like they weren't fully connected to me. I tried to ground myself by noticing small details. The chipped edge of the table. The stain on the floor near my foot. The way my bag strap was twisted around my ankle. Then it happened again. I glanced toward the bathroom hallway without meaning to. From my seat, I could see the bathroom door reflected faintly in a framed picture on the wall. Not clearly. Just enough to catch movement. In the reflection, the bathroom mirror showed the table again. This time I wasn't screaming yet. I was sitting stiff, eyes wide, mouth tight, like I was trying not to. I felt cold spread through my chest. I looked away immediately, staring down at my plate. My heart was racing. I could hear blood in my ears. I didn't want to look again, but I couldn't stop myself. The reflection had changed. I was screaming now. Hands clenched, shoulders shaking. The sound still didn't exist in the real room, but my body knew what it was seeing. I felt the echo of it in my throat, like my body was preparing to do the same thing. I swallowed hard and took a breath. Slow. Careful. My date didn't move. Didn't react. Didn't notice anything wrong. Or maybe he did and didn't care. He kept eating calm and steady, like nothing unusual was happening inches away from us in another version of the room. I realized then that the mirror wasn't showing the future. It was showing something happening at the same time. The thought made my hands start to shake. I wrapped them around my glass to hide it. The cold helped a little. I stood up again too fast, chair squeaking loud against the floor. A few people looked over. No one screamed. No one reacted like the mirror showed. I walked back to the bathroom, trying not to run. Inside, the mirror greeted me immediately. This time, the version of me at the table wasn't alone. People around her had pushed back. Chairs tipped. Faces turned away. My date was still there, sitting perfectly still, watching her with that same unreadable look. And her scream looked worse now. More desperate, like it had been going on for a while. I stared at it, frozen, tears burning my eyes. I felt like I was watching myself drown through glass. Then the mirror version of me stopped screaming. She turned her head slowly and looked straight at me. At the me in the bathroom. Her mouth moved. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what she was saying. "This is you if you stay." My breath hitched. I stepped back, nearly slipping on the sticky floor. My reflection in the mirror was still calm, but my eyes looked wild now. I didn't look again. I walked straight out of the bathroom, past the table, grabbed my bag, and left. I didn't explain. I didn't look at him. I didn't care what anyone thought. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I stood there shaking, trying to slow my breathing. The sounds of the restaurant faded behind me. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against it. I didn't check mirrors for the rest of the night. I don't know what would have happened if I stayed. I don't want to know. I just know that sometimes when I pass that place, I swear I can hear someone scream me inside, even though the windows look calm. I didn't even want to go on that date. That's the part that sticks with me the most now. Not fear, not shock, just the fact that my whole body had already decided no, and my brain dragged me anyway. I remember sitting on my bed, shoes on, phone in my hand, staring at the wall in the room I live in, and thinking how easy it would be to just not show up. I told myself I needed practice being social. I told myself I couldn't keep canceling forever. I told myself a lot of things that didn't help. We met at a place that used to be a bowling alley and got converted into a coffee bar and pizza spot. The lanes were still there, just covered with long tables and rugs. It smelled like burnt coffee and old wood. Everything echoed slightly, like the building remembered being louder. It was early evening, still light out, and the place wasn't crowded yet. She was already there, sitting at one of the old lane tables, legs crossed, phone face down. She looked calm in a way that didn't feel forced. Not overly friendly, not stiff, just settled. That alone made me relax a bit. I sat down across from her and tried to match her energy. Things started fine. Normal, even. We talked about school, work, random stuff that fills time. I noticed she listened really closely. Not just nodding, but tracking everything I said. I didn't think much of it then. I thought it meant she cared. We ordered drinks and waited. I watched people come in, couples laughing, groups of friends dragging chairs together. The light shifted through the tall windows and turned everything a dull orange. It felt like the night was slowly closing in, but not in a dramatic way, just natural. At some point, she leaned back and looked at me like she was lining something up in her head. Her expression didn't change much, but the focus sharpened. That's when she asked me about my biggest regret. Not in a heavy way, not emotional, just casual, like asking about a favorite movie. I hesitated because that's not first date material, but she waited without pushing. The silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional. I don't know why I answered honestly. Maybe because I was tired of small talk. Maybe because I wanted to seem deep. Maybe because the regret was always sitting close to the surface anyway, waiting for an excuse. I told her about the year I messed everything up. How I had been lined up for something good, something that would have changed my path, and how I'd ruined it by trusting the wrong person and staying quiet when I should have spoken up. No big dramatic blow-up, just a slow collapse. Missed chances, doors closing quietly. I talked longer than I meant to. I could hear myself doing it and couldn't stop. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that comes when I think about how different things could have been. I stopped finally, embarrassed by how much I had shared. She didn't react the way people usually do. No sympathy face, no reassurance. No awkward pivot back to lighter topics. She just nodded like she was filing something away. Then she calmly explained how she could make it happen again. Not metaphorically, not as a joke, not in a vague way. She laid it out step by step, like she was explaining directions to a place she'd already been. How the same kind of pressure could be applied. How the same silence could be recreated. How the right timing and the right words could push me into making the same choices. She talked about people like they were pieces on a board. Predictable, reusable. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like missing a step on the stairs. I laughed at first because that's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I expected her to laugh too. She didn't. She just watched me, eyes steady, waiting for my reaction to catch up. I realized then that she wasn't guessing. She was using details I hadn't even noticed I had given her. The way I described the people involved. The order I told things in. The parts it rushed through. She knew exactly where it had hurt the most, and she went straight there. I felt exposed. Not emotionally, but structurally. Like she had looked at the blueprint of me and found the weak beams. I tried to change the subject. I made a comment about the place, the lanes, how weird it was to eat pizza where people used to bowl. She let me talk, but she didn't follow. Her attention stayed locked on me, patient, like she knew I'd circle back. The drinks came. I took a sip and nearly choked. It tasted wrong, too bitter. I set it down and didn't touch it again. She continued, not rushing, explaining how regret wasn't a single event but a pattern. How once you know the pattern, you can rebuild it. She mentioned timing again. Stress, isolation. The importance of letting someone think it's their idea. She said all of this with the same tone someone might use to explain a recipe they'd made 100 times. The noise of the place faded into the background. I could hear a bowling pin fall somewhere. Even though there were no lanes in use, the sound echoed and then disappeared. I noticed then that she hadn't shared anything personal about herself. Not really. Everything she had said was either neutral or about me. I tried to think back and couldn't remember a single regret she had mentioned. Not even a small one. I felt stupid for not noticing sooner. I shifted in my seat, suddenly aware of how close the table felt. How little space there was between us. I imagined her taking what I had told her and testing it. Tweaking it. Saving it for later. The idea that someone could carry around a map of my worst moment made my skin crawl. She talked about how easy it would be to recreate the same outcome if she wanted to. Not threatening, just factual, like the option was there, sitting on the table between us, and she was letting me know she could pick it up any time. I started planning my exit in my head, how to stand up without making it obvious. How to walk away without escalating anything. My heart was beating too fast, and I hated that she could probably see it. The lights in the place flickered once, just a quick dip, and for a second everything felt unreal, like a set piece. Then they steadied again. I checked my phone, pretending to read something. There was nothing new. The time hadn't moved as much as I thought it should have. It felt like we had been there for hours, but it had barely been any time at all. I stood up abruptly, hair scraping loud against the floor. A few people glanced over. She didn't flinch. She just looked up at me, calm as ever, like this was another predictable step. I mumbled something about needing air and grabbed my jacket. She stayed seated, hands folded, watching me with that same measured attention. Walking out felt like pushing through water. The air outside was cooler, fresher, and it hit me all at once. I stood there for a second, breathing too hard, trying to ground myself. My phone buzzed. A notification from her already. I didn't open it. I didn't want more words from her in my head. I walked to my car and sat inside without starting it. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly. From the realization that she had been right about one thing. Patterns are real. People do repeat themselves. And she had seen mine clearly enough to explain it back to me. I drove home slowly, checking my mirrors too often. When I got back to my room, I sat on the floor and stared at nothing for a long time. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't know how. How do you explain that someone didn't threaten you, didn't touch you, didn't raise their voice, and still made you feel like your past was a weapon they knew how to reload? I blocked her later that night, deleted the app, tried to sleep. Sometimes I think about what she said, about how easily things can be set back in motion. Not because I believe her completely, but because she spoke like someone who had done it before. I knew something was wrong before I could explain why, and that's the worst kind of wrong. Not the obvious kind where alarms go off and your body tells you to leave, but the quiet kind where everything looks fine and your brain keeps tripping over nothing. I remember standing in my bathroom, brushing my hair, staring at my own reflection, and thinking I felt like I was already late for something even though I wasn't. Like the night had started without me. We picked a casual place, not fancy, not scary. A newer restaurant downtown that tried too hard to look relaxed. Concrete floors, fake plants, string lights that never got dimmed enough. The kind of place people post photos from and forget about the next day. I had read the menu online earlier that afternoon while I was supposed to be doing homework. I knew exactly what I wanted, I always do. Decision-making stresses me out, so I like to plan ahead. He got there before me. I could see him through the window, sitting at a small table near the wall, scrolling on his phone. He looked normal. That word again. Tall, clean clothes. Hair neat in a way that looked intentional, but not forced. He stood when he saw me, smiled, and waved. Nothing about him screamed danger. That almost made it worse later. A host walked me over and left us with menus even though I already knew what I wanted. I sat down, put my phone face down on the table, and took a breath. The place was loud, but not in a fun way. Too many overlapping conversations. Music just loud enough to be annoying. My knee bounced under the table like it always does when I'm nervous. I noticed his eyes then. Not the color, just the way he watched me. Not staring, not intense. More like studying, like he was waiting for something specific to happen. The server came over quickly. Young, tired-looking, already halfway through their shift mentally. I straightened up, ready to order and get it over with. I didn't get the chance. He leaned forward slightly and ordered for me. At first, my brain didn't process it as wrong. People do that sometimes. It's annoying, but it happens. What froze me wasn't that he ordered for me. It was how he did it. He used my voice. Not a perfect copy, not like a movie impression, but close enough that my stomach dropped. Same rhythm. Same soft uptalk at the end of sentences. Same pause before saying the name of the dish, like I was double-checking myself. And then it happened. The small breathy laugh I make when I'm nervous, the one I didn't even know I made until that moment. He did it exactly. My hands went cold. I stared at him, waiting for him to crack a smile to show it was a joke. He didn't. He sat back like nothing weird had just happened. The server didn't react. They nodded, wrote it down, and moved on. Like this was normal. Like this happened all the time. I tried to laugh it off in my head. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe it just sounded similar. Maybe my voice wasn't as unique as I thought. But I knew better. You always know your own voice, especially the parts you don't like. He ordered for himself next, using his own voice this time. Deeper, calmer, like flipping a switch. I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain, like he had reached into me and pulled something out without asking. I became painfully aware of every sound I made after that. Every breath. Every movement of my hands. The food took longer than expected. During the wait, he talked. About random stuff. Work, shows he liked, places he wanted to go. I nodded, reacted when I was supposed to, but my brain was stuck replaying that moment over and over. I kept thinking about how much time he would have needed to hear me enough to copy that. We had talked on the phone once. Maybe twice. A few voice messages. Not enough to get it that exact. Unless he had been listening more than I realized. The food finally came. Mine was placed in front of me carefully, like it mattered. I picked up my fork and realized my hand was shaking. I forced myself to take a bite. It tasted fine. Good, even. That almost made me angry. Halfway through eating, I noticed something else. He was matching me. Not obviously, not in a creepy mirror way, but small things. When I took a sip of my drink, he did too, a second later. When I leaned back, he adjusted his chair. When I crossed my ankles, he shifted his feet. I tested it. I set my fork down and waited. He set his down. I brushed hair behind my ear. He touched his face. My chest felt tight. I felt like I was watching myself from the outside, like I was being slowly copied in real time. The noise in the restaurant faded into a dull blur. I could hear my own breathing too loud in my ears. I realized then that I hadn't laughed once since he ordered, not even the nervous one. I was afraid to make any sound at all. The server came back to check on us. Before I could react, he leaned forward again. This time, he didn't just copy my voice. He copied my timing. The exact moment I usually jump in. The same slight stumble at the start. The same words I had practiced saying in my head. It was like hearing a recording of myself played by someone else's mouth. I felt something break in me then. Not dramatic. Just a quiet snap, like a string pulled too tight. I put my fork down and pushed my plate away. My appetite was gone completely. My skin felt too tight on my body, like I didn't fit right anymore. He watched me closely. His head tilted just a little. Curious, like he was checking his work. I started noticing other things after that. How he finished my thoughts before I even formed them fully. How he reacted to things before I did. How he smiled at moments I usually smiled at, not because they were funny, but because I always smiled there. It felt like he was one step ahead of me, walking my path before I could. I thought about leaving. The idea flickered in my head like a weak signal. But then I imagined standing up, scraping my chair back, and hearing him do it too. Imagine walking toward the door and feeling him fall into step beside me, matching my pace. The thought made my stomach twist. The check came without us asking. I hadn't even noticed how long we had been there. Time felt thick, like it was stretching and folding in on itself. He reached for it, then paused. He looked at me, really looked, like he was waiting for something. I didn't move. After a moment, he paid. I didn't look at the number. I didn't want any more details stuck in my head. We stood up. My legs felt weak, but they held. I grabbed my jacket and slung my bag over my shoulder. The weight of it felt grounding. Real. As we walked toward the door, I heard it again. That sound. My nervous laugh. Quiet this time, almost to himself. I didn't make it. The night air hit me like a wall. Cold and sharp and real. I took a deep breath and felt like I was stepping back into my body after being gone for hours. He stopped a few steps behind me. I didn't turn around. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked to my car. A message notification. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. When I got home, I sat on my bed in the dark and tried to make noise. Coughed. Hummed. Laughed on purpose. I needed to hear my own voice again, unfiltered. It took a while before it felt like it belonged to me. I blocked him that night. Deleted everything. Messages, call logs, voice notes. Still, sometimes when I'm nervous, I catch myself stopping mid-laugh. I almost didn't go because the place felt wrong the second I looked it up. Not sketchy wrong. Not dangerous looking, just off in a way I couldn't explain. The photos online were all slightly outdated, like they had been taken years ago, and never updated, even though reviews kept coming in. People said the food was solid, the lighting was calm, good spot for a quiet night. That's what I wanted. Quiet. I had spent the whole day feeling like my head was buzzing, like I needed something normal to anchor me. We agreed to meet at this family-owned restaurant tucked behind the strip mall, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I lived about 20 minutes away, and the drive felt longer than it should have. The road stretched out, empty, and the radio kept cutting out no matter what station I tried. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my stomach felt tight, not for nerves exactly, more like anticipation mixed with dread. The building was low and wide, with faded paint and warm yellow lights glowing through the windows. It looked cozy in an old way. I checked my phone, adjusted my jacket, and walked in. The smell hit first. Garlic, oil, something sweet underneath it. Not bad, just heavy. The host stand was empty for a second, then someone appeared from the back like they had been waiting just out of sight. They smiled too fast, eyes flicking past me toward the door behind me. That's when I noticed him stepping in. He looked normal. That was the first thing I thought. Average height, dark hair, clean clothes, nothing that stood out. He smiled when he saw me like he was relieved, and that made me relax a little. We hadn't met before, just talked for a couple weeks. He had suggested the place, said it was his favorite. I thought that was kind of sweet. The shift in the room was immediate. The host's smile changed. Not wider, not smaller, just different, like it had been swapped out for another one. They nodded toward him, then glanced at me again, slower this time. The look wasn't friendly. It was cautious. We were led to a table near the back, not hidden but not central either. As we walked, I noticed staff watching us. Not staring, just checking. A server paused near the kitchen door, hands clasped tight. Another one whispered something to a coworker and looked down fast when I noticed. I told myself I was imagining it. New places always feel weird at first. I sat down, set my phone on the table, took a breath. That's when the apologies started. Not directly. No one looked at me and said anything out loud, but the way they moved around and told the story all on its own. The server who came over placed his menu down carefully, like setting something fragile. They nodded at him, quick and respectful, then glanced at me again with something close to worry. Another staff member walked past and slowed, eyes on him, then bowed their head slightly. It wasn't formal, just enough to notice. Their mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and their hands twisted together after. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I didn't know why, just I was suddenly aware of my posture, my face, the way I was sitting. I forced myself to relax my shoulders. He acted like none of this was happening. He leaned back in his chair, comfortable, like this was his living room. He didn't look around, didn't acknowledge the attention. He just picked up his menu and scanned it casually. The server returned with water, hands trembling just a little. They set my glass down, then his, lingering for half a second too long. Their eyes flicked between us, their lips pressed together tight. I caught the shape of an apology in the way they dipped their head toward me, quick and subtle, like they didn't want him to notice. My chest tightened. I tried to focus on the menu, but the words blurred. Everything felt louder. Forks clinking, plates sliding, footsteps moving too fast or too slow. I noticed a small crack in the wall near our table, patched badly like something had hit it hard once. Food came out quickly, faster than it should have, like they wanted to keep things smooth, keep him calm. I didn't know why that thought landed in my head, but it stuck. As we ate, the tension didn't fade. If anything, it got thicker. Every time I moved, staff reacted, not in a dramatic way, just subtle shifts. A server hovering nearby. Someone pretending to wipe the same spot on a table over and over. Eyes checking his hands, his face, then sliding to me. At one point, someone from the kitchen came out holding a tray, stopped when they saw us, and went pale. They stepped back like they'd touched something hot. That's when I realized they weren't watching me because they were worried about him. They were watching him because they were worried about me. The thought sat heavy in my stomach. I noticed scars then, small ones on his hands, half hidden, old and thin. His knuckles were rough, skin split, and healed wrong. He caught me looking and smiled, easy, relaxed, like it meant nothing. I tried to eat, but my appetite was gone. The food tasted fine, but my mouth felt dry. I took a sip of water and my hand shook. Another server passed by and placed a small dish on the table without explanation. Something complimentary, maybe. Their hands lingered again, fingers brushing the edge of the plate. They looked at me, eyes wide and serious, and made a tiny shaking motion with their head. Slow, careful. Then they looked at him and nodded, deep and respectful, like acknowledging someone with authority. My heart started pounding. Memories clicked together fast. The outdated photos online, the reviews that felt vague, the way this place felt preserved in time, like it had seen things and adjusted around them instead of changing. I started noticing signs of past damage. A chair leg replaced with a different color wood, a dent in the floor near the entrance, a long scratch along the bar, filled in but still visible. Nothing fresh, nothing obvious, just marks left behind and worked around. He finished eating before me and leaned back again, eyes scanning the room lazily. When his gaze landed on a staff member, they stiffened. When it moved on, they exhaled. Something shifted in his mood then. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe my silence. Maybe my tension. His smile faded just a little. His jaw tightened. The air changed. I felt it before anything else happened, like pressure dropping, like everyone in the room collectively braced. Staff moved faster. Someone rushed past with a towel. Another grabbed something from under the counter. I didn't see what. The server came back, placed the check down early, way too early. The number on it made no sense, barely more than what we ordered. No extras. No added charges. Like they just wanted us gone. I noticed then that no one else in the restaurant was laughing. Talking was minimal. Conversations were hushed. I stayed down. He reached for the check, paused, then looked at me. His expression was flat now, assessing. My stomach dropped. I realized then that whatever had happened last time had been bad enough to burn itself into this place. Bad enough that everyone remembered him. Bad enough that they had protocols. Apologies made sense now. Warnings disguised as kindness. Careful movements. Fear wrapped in politeness. I didn't wait. I stood up, chair scraping loud against the floor. The sound made everyone flinch. He looked surprised for half a second, then amused. I grabbed my jacket, my phone, and walked. No rush, no running, just steady steps toward the door. The host appeared instantly, already there, holding it open. Their eyes met mine, and for a split second, all pretense dropped. It was raw concern, pleading almost. I walked out into the cold air and didn't look back. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel, breathing hard. My phone buzzed with a notification from him. I didn't open it. I just started the engine and drove. Later that night, I read the reviews again, really read them. Between the lines, people mentioning tense vibes, strange staff, saying it felt like walking into someone else's memory. I never went back. I never answered him. Sometimes I wonder what happened last time. Not enough to dig, just enough to feel grateful it wasn't me. I almost canceled that night because the sky looked like it was about to bruise. Not rain, not storm, just that dull, heavy color that makes everything feel slow and sticky. I was already dressed, sitting on the edge of my bed in the tiny room I live in behind my aunt's garage, scrolling and rereading the messages I had already read too many times. Nothing about him seemed off. He liked old diners, hated loud places, said he worked late hours and liked quiet company. It sounded normal enough. Boring even. I wanted boring. The diner was one of those half-forgotten places wedged between a closed laundromat and a bake shop that never seemed open. Inside it smelled like old oil and lemon cleaner. The boots were cracked and patched with duct tape that had gone gray. The clock above the counter was round and yellowed, the kind that probably hadn't been replaced since the place opened. I noticed it right away because it was ticking too loud, like it wanted attention. He was already there when I walked in, sitting in a booth with his hands folded on the table. Average height, average face, brown hair that fell into his eyes like he hadn't bothered to style it. He stood up when he saw me, and something about that made me relax a little. Polite. Normal. I slid into the booth across from him and tried to ignore the way the vinyl stuck to the back of my legs. I checked my phone out of habit and saw the time. 8:17. I remember because I was annoyed I was running late. I glanced up at the wall clock, and it matched. That felt grounding, like the world was lined up properly. The server came over and dropped off menus without much energy. I'm reading the same page over and over because my brain was still buzzing from the day. I checked the time again. 8:14. My phone said it clearly. I frowned and looked at the wall clock. It also said 8:14. I remember thinking my phone must have glitched, or maybe I remembered wrong. It happens. I shrugged it off. He was talking, or at least his mouth was moving. I wasn't really absorbing what he was saying. I was watching his face instead, noticing how smooth his skin looked under the fluorescent lights. Not in a flattering way, just oddly even. I told myself it was the lighting. Diners make everyone look strange. The food came fast. Fries too pale, burgers too flat. I took a bite, and it tasted like every other diner burger I had ever eaten. Grease and salt, and nothing else. Comfort food that didn't actually comfort. I checked the time again without thinking. 8:09. That's when my stomach tightened. I looked from my phone to the wall clock, back and forth, slower this time. Both said the same thing, 8:09. I sat there holding my phone like it might buzz and explain itself. Maybe the place had bad reception. Maybe my phone was sensing wrong, but that didn't explain the wall clock. I looked at him again. His face seemed softer somehow, not in a cute way, in a way that made it harder to pin down his age. Earlier I had pegged him as maybe early 20s. Now I wasn't so sure. His jaw looked less defined, his eyes wider, almost curious in a way that felt wrong for a first date. I pushed that thought away. Nerves do weird things. I forced myself to focus on eating. The fries were getting cold. The ticking of the clock felt louder. Each second felt stretched, like it was dragging itself across the room. I checked the time again. 8:02. I didn't bother hiding my confusion this time. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. When I looked up, he was leaning forward, elbows on the table. I hadn't noticed him move. His hair looked lighter, not in color, but in thickness, like there was less of it. His cheeks were fuller. My chest felt tight, like I had swallowed something too big. I told myself I was tired. I had worked a double shift. I hadn't slept enough. My brain was filling in gaps with nonsense. I took a sip of my drink and nearly gagged. It tasted flat, like it had been sitting out all day. I checked the time again. 7:55. My hands were shaking now, and I hated that. I hated how obvious it felt. I looked around the diner, expecting someone else to notice. The server was wiping the counter in slow circles, her face blank. An older couple sat near the window, frozen in the same posture they'd been in since I arrived. It felt like the whole room was stuck, except for me and him and that stupid clock. He looked younger again. There was no denying it now. His skin had that stretched, almost shiny look, the kind people have before they grow into their features. His shoulders seemed narrower. His hoodie hung on him differently, like it was too big. I checked the time again, even though I didn't want to. 7:48. Panic started crawling up my spine. I tried to remember exactly how long I had been there. It couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. The clock was insisting otherwise. I thought about leaving, just standing up and walking out. The door was right there. Nothing was stopping me, except the feeling that if I stood up, something would break. I noticed then that his feet didn't reach the floor anymore. Not by much, but enough that it made my throat go dry. He was swinging them slightly back and forth, a small restless motion. His face had lost any trace of stubble. His eyes were too big for his face now. I checked the time again. 7:41. My phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was made of stone. The numbers glowed back at me, steady and cruel. I tried opening other apps, checking messages. Anything to prove the world outside this diner was still moving forward. Everything showed the same time. The walls felt closer. The ticking felt faster, even though the seconds were moving backward. My date's hands were smaller now. His fingers shorter, nails bitten down. There was a faint smear of ketchup on his cheek that I didn't remember being there before. I checked the time again. 7:34. I couldn't look at him anymore. I stared at the table, at the scratches carved into it by bored people over the years. Names, hearts, random lines. I wondered how many of them had been stuck here too. The thought made my chest hurt. Something brushed my foot under the table. I flinched hard enough that the booth creaked. I didn't look. I checked the time again. 7:28. When I finally forced myself to look up, he looked like a kid. Not a little kid, but young enough that every alarm in my head was screaming. His hoodie swallowed his frame. His face was round, unformed. His eyes followed me with open curiosity, like I was the strange one. The clock ticked louder. 7:22. I stood up so fast the table rattled. My legs felt weak, but they held. The diner didn't react. The server kept wiping. The couple by the window didn't move. The door was still there, the exit sign glowing dull red above it. I checked the time one last time before I walked away. 7:19. I didn't look back at him. I didn't want to see what age he was when I reached the door. I pushed it open and stepped outside into the bruised evening. The air felt sharp and real and cold enough to make my eyes water. My phone buzzed in my hand. The time jumped forward suddenly, violently. 9:03. A missed notification from him sat on my screen, time-stamped 9 o'clock, asking if I was close. I didn't answer. I walked until my legs burned and my head felt clear. Later that night, lying on my bed, I tried to convince myself it had been stress, a bad night, my brain playing tricks. But every time I check the time now, I do it carefully, slowly, and I never go back to that diner. I almost did not go on the date, and not in the dramatic way people say that after something bad happens. It was more like my body felt heavy for no clear reason, like when you wake up late and the day already feels ruined. I remember standing in my room, phone in my hand, staring at our reflection and thinking about how easy it would be to cancel and just live in my bed for the night. But I went anyway, because nothing bad had ever really happened to me before, and I still believed that most weird feelings were just nerves. We met at this quiet cafe near the edge of town, the kind of place that always smells like dust and burnt coffee, even when it is empty. It had old posters on the wall and chipped tables that looked like they had been there forever. It was not romantic, just cheap and convenient. She was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table near the window, hands folded like she had been waiting a long time. She smiled when she saw me, not too big, not too forced. I remember thinking she looked calmer than anyone I had ever met on a first date. Everything felt normal at first. Too normal, maybe. She listened when I talked. She nodded at the right times. She remembered small details from our messages that I had forgotten saying. It felt nice, like being seen without having to try. I started to relax, started to lean into the chair, started to forget about that heavy feeling from earlier. About halfway through, she reached down beside her chair and pulled out a thick scrapbook. It was old, a kind with worn fabric on the cover and corners that had been bent too many times. On the front, written neatly, were the words "Our memories." No hearts, no decorations. Just that. I remember feeling confused, but also weirdly flattered, like this was some awkward attempt at being sentimental. She slid it across the table toward me and watched my face closely, like she was checking for something specific. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. The cover felt soft in a way that made my skin crawl a little, like it had been handled a lot. When I opened it, I laughed at first. Not because it was funny, but because my brain could not process what I was seeing fast enough. The first page had a photo of me sitting on the steps outside of my old high school. I recognized it instantly. I was wearing a hoodie I had lost years ago. The background matched a place I had not been to since I was 15. I told myself it was probably a public photo. I told myself maybe I had posted it somewhere and forgotten, but then I turned the page. There were more photos. Me at a bus stop, staring at my phone. Me walking into a grocery store near my old neighborhood. Me sitting alone at a fast food place, head down, clearly unaware anyone was watching. The dates written under the photos went back years, way before we met, way before I even lived in this part of town. My chest started to feel tight. My fingers flipped pages faster, like I could outrun the feeling if I just kept moving. The photos were in order, almost like a timeline. Different haircuts, different clothes, different versions of me that I barely recognized but knew were real because they felt too specific to be fake. Some photos were blurry, taken from far away. Others were close enough that I could see details, like the small scar near my eyebrow or the way I always slouch when I am tired. There were photos of me outside places I went regularly and places I only went once. Places I had never posted about. Places no one should have known I was at. I stopped breathing normally without realizing it. My hands were shaking so bad the pages rattled. I looked up at her, hoping for some kind of explanation on her face, but she just looked calm. Patient, like this was all going exactly how she expected. I went back to the first page and looked closer. The handwriting under the photo was neat and careful. Dates, short notes, things like bad day or seemed sad here or waited a long time. Comments about my mood, comments about what I was wearing, comments about who I was with or not with. I realized then that this was not just a collection, it was a record. As I kept flipping, the photos started to move indoors, shots taken through windows, reflections caught in mirrors. angles that made my stomach turn when I tried to imagine where the camera had been. There was a photo of me in my room, sitting on my bed looking exhausted. I recognized the poster on the wall behind me, the one I took down last year. I felt cold all over. I remember thinking about my door, about how often I lock it, about how many times I had felt watched but brushed it off as nothing. Suddenly, all those moments lined up in my head like pieces snapping together. Near the middle of the scrapbook, there were empty spaces where photos had been removed. The corners still had sticky marks. Next to them were notes about moments that were missing. Things like argument with friend or stayed home all day. It felt like even the gaps were intentional. My phone buzzed on the table, and I jumped so hard I almost knocked the scrapbook onto the floor. I did not check it. I could not look away from the pages. Toward the end, the photos got clearer, closer, taken from angles that suggested whoever took them did not care about being subtle anymore. There was one of me standing outside this same cafe, taken earlier that day. I was looking down at my phone, probably checking the time, probably wondering if I was early. The last page was blank except for a single sentence written neatly at the bottom. Something about finally meeting properly. Something about waiting being worth it. I closed the scrapbook slowly. The cafe felt different now, like the walls had moved closer. Every sound felt too loud. Every person felt like a possible threat. I suddenly hated how public the place was, how exposed I felt. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. People looked over. She did not move. She just watched me like this was still going according to plan. I left without finishing my drink. I left without looking back. The bell above the door rang too loudly when I pushed it open, and the night air hit me like a slap. I walked fast, then faster, then almost ran, not caring where I was going as long as it was away. When I got home, I locked the door. Then I checked it again. I sat on my bed and tried to make sense of what I had seen. My head hurt like I had been up all night, even though it was still early. I started going through my social media, my old posts, my tagged photos, trying to figure out how someone could have tracked me for that long without me knowing. I could not find anything that explained it. The photos in that scrapbook were not reposts or screenshots. They were original, personal, invasive. I did not sleep much that night. Every small noise made me tense. Every shadow felt wrong. I kept thinking about that photo in my room, about how close someone had been without me noticing. The next morning, I checked my phone and saw a new message from her. I did not open it. I deleted the app we met on. I locked down my accounts. I told myself that was enough, even though I knew it was not. Sometimes when I am walking somewhere alone, I get the sudden urge to look over my shoulder. Sometimes I imagine a camera lens catching the side of my face. Sometimes I wonder if another scrapbook is already filling up somewhere, pages waiting for new photos. I knew something was off before the food even showed up, like that feeling when your phone buzzes and you already know it is bad news, but you check anyway. I was sitting across from this guy I met online, in a place that smelled like burnt cheese and floor cleaner, trying to act normal while my brain kept poking me with little warning taps. I remember thinking I should have stayed home and scrolled until my eyes hurt, but I was already there, already stuck in the booth, already pretending this was fine. The place was loud but also empty at the same time, like all the noise was bouncing off nothing. The lights flickered in a way that made everything look slightly unreal. He looked normal enough. Not cute, not ugly, just there. His smile never really matched his eyes, which stayed weirdly calm no matter what I said. I kept checking my phone on the table like it was a life raft. I do that when I am nervous, just touching it, making sure it is still mine. About 10 minutes in, he leaned forward and gave me this serious look, like he was about to say something deep. Instead of saying anything, he slid his phone across the table and tapped mine with one finger. He wanted us to switch phones for trust. No jokes, no build-up, just that. It felt like a prank setup without a punchline. I laughed a little because I thought that was the correct reaction, but inside my chest something dropped. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I had nothing to hide. I told myself I did not want to look dramatic or paranoid. That is how I ended up pushing my phone across the sticky table and picking up his. The phone was warm, like he had been holding it too tight. The screen lit up with a basic lock screen, nothing personal, no pets or friends, or anything that said a real person used it. That should have been my sign to stop. The second my phone left my hand, it started buzzing on his side of the table. At first, it was just one vibration, then another, then a nonstop rattling like it was angry. He did not look surprised. He just watched my face like he was waiting for something. I reached for my phone without thinking, but he casually pulled it closer to himself, still smiling that not smile. The buzzing stopped for a second, then his phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down and saw notification after notification stacking up. Different names, different profile pictures, all unread messages. I did not open them at first. I just stared at the previews, my stomach slowly twisting into knots. The previews were all the same kind of thing. People saying I ruined their lives. People saying they lost everything because of me. People asking why I did it. People telling me I knew what I was doing. None of the names meant anything to me. None of the faces were familiar, but they all seemed very sure about who I was. My hands started sweating so bad I almost dropped his phone. I looked up at him, expecting him to laugh or say it was a joke or explain. He did nothing. He just watched. The restaurant noise faded into this dull background hum, like my ears were underwater. I finally opened one message. It was long. It talked about a job lost, a family torn apart, nights spent staring at the ceiling because of something I supposedly did. It mentioned dates and places I had never been. It mentioned decisions I had never made. It ended with a line about how I should remember their name. I did not. Another message came in right after, then another. The phone felt heavier with each buzz. My own phone started buzzing again on his side of the table like it was answering back. I did not want to know what was showing up there. I tried to stand up. My legs felt weak, like I had stood up too fast after sitting too long. He placed his hand flat on my phone, not grabbing it, just resting there, claiming it without force. I froze. People around us were eating, laughing, living normal lives while my world was quietly tipping over. More messages came in. One mentioned a hospital. Another mentioned someone not waking up. They never described anything graphic, but the weight of it pressed down on me all the same. The messages were detailed enough to feel real, but vague enough that I could not prove they were fake. My brain tried to find patterns, but there were too many threads crossing at once. I checked the time. Only 15 minutes had passed since we sat down. It felt like hours. I realized something else then. None of the messages were asking who I was. None of them were confused. They all assumed I knew exactly what they were talking about. I scrolled through the phone more, ignoring the growing pile of new notifications. There were photos too. Blurry screenshots of emails, cropped images of forms, grainy pictures of places that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to someone else. My name was attached to things I had never seen before. My email address was there, my profile picture, my accounts, but they were slightly off, like copies that had been smudged. I looked back at him. His eyes flicked down to his phone and then back to me, like he was checking progress. That was when I understood that this was not random. This was not a glitch or a prank. This was prepared. My phone buzzed again on the table. He finally moved his hand and slid it back to me, slow and careful. I grabbed it immediately. The screen was already open. Messages filled it. Responses to things I had never sent. Angry replies. Desperate ones. People reacting to words that did not exist in my memory. My sent messages were full. Long paragraphs. Apologies. Explanations. Excuses. Promises. They were written in a tone that felt like mine but twisted, like someone had studied how I type and copied it just well enough. Timestamps showed they had been sent over months. Some from times I was in class. Some from times I was asleep. I scrolled until my thumb hurt. My chest felt tight, like I was breathing through fabric. He finally stood up, pushing the booth aside. He did not say anything. He just left. No rush, no hesitation. He walked past the counter and out the door like this was a normal end to a normal night. I stayed there staring at my phone until the server asked if everything was okay. I nodded because that is what you do. I paid for my food even though I barely touched it. I walked outside into the cool air, expecting to feel better, but the feeling followed me like a shadow. The messages did not stop. All the way home, my phone buzzed in my pocket, against my leg, against my ribs. I wanted to throw it away, but it felt glued to me, like cutting it loose would somehow make things worse. When I got to my room, I locked the door and sat on the floor. I started going through my accounts one by one. Passwords had been changed. Recovery emails added. Phone numbers I did not recognize attached to everything. It was like someone had built a second version of my online self and let it run wild. Some messages started referencing the date. People saying I finally showed my face. People saying they saw me. My heart dropped every time my screen lit up. I did not sleep. I sat there reading and reading, trying to understand the scope of it, trying to find the start. There was no clear beginning. It just went back and back until the trail dissolved into nothing. Near morning, the messages slowed. My phone felt quiet in a way that was almost worse. There was one last notification. No name, no picture. Just a short message saying trust works both ways. I blocked everything I could. I reported what I could. I shut down accounts until my online presence shrank to almost nothing. But even now, days later, my phone still feels wrong in my hand. Every buzz makes my stomach drop. Every unknown number makes my skin crawl. I never heard from him again. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. Sometimes I wonder if he ever needed my phone at all, or if the switch was just to watch my face when the truth started pouring in. I still do not know what parts of it were real, or if any of those lives were actually ruined. All I know is that somewhere out there, there is a version of me that people hate, and is way more active than I am.